Chapter 1365. Shipyard. Accompanied by the shipyard director Hong Yi, Qin Chuan inspected the newly produced warships. The five-star Army Navy was currently using sailboats. Division-level warships were using Level 4 warships, regiment-level warships were using Level 3 warships, and so on and so forth. After years of hard work, they had finally built a Level 5 warship. The size of the ship and the number of cannons made it the warship used by the officers. We still need to build more warships like this. If there's any need, the other departments will fully cooperate and strive to upgrade all the warships. Looking at the ship that was over 100 meters long, Yang Chendong sighed. Yes, the Navy headquarters also has such a request. In the future, all division-level warships will be upgraded to Level 5 warships. In the future, we will focus on researching Level 6 and 7 warships. Hong Yi said with a face full of excitement. No, there's no need to worry about Level 6 and 7 warships. Right now, the research department is researching steam engines. Once that thing is built, it will be used on Level 6 warships. At that time, the speed will be dozens of times faster than now. Yang Chendong sighed and said, Paper factory. Factory director Kong and led Yang Chendong to inspect many workshops. Looking at the white paper being produced from the production line, Yang Chendong walked forward and took 2 pages. He found that the paper was very sturdy and thick. Very good. In the future, Yang Xia's children will have to go to school. This will require a lot of paper. You will have to work hard. Yes. Kong nodded. We will definitely work hard. After spring, we will build more production lines. There won't be any delays. There must be no delays. Education is the foundation of the country. Only when the people have culture and wisdom can the country become stronger. This is the national policy, and no one can change it, much less neglect it. Glass factory. A year's GDP and wealth had reached a certain ratio. It had become one of the important sources of Yang Xia's wealth. As the factory director, Qin Ming had his own pride. However, when he faced Yang Chendong, that bit of pride had long disappeared, because everything in front of him was created by this person. Glass was not a big deal in Yangxia. It was even used in ordinary households. For example, the windows of many residential buildings were made of transparent glass. But to the Yang family, this was still a novelty, especially the various accessories made of glass. Businessmen from other places would rush to buy them. After creating so much production value and wealth, the head of the glass factory, Qin Ming, would be glowing with happiness wherever he went. The factory's confidentiality measures still need to be strengthened. We can't let others steal the results. If you need anything, you can go directly to Yang Wu. He will make the arrangements. Yang Chendong was very clear that the production of glass was not that complicated. It could be said that it was not difficult for those who knew how to do it. Once the process was known, he could make it, but others could also make it. That would be a big problem. Yes, 6th young master, don't worry. The people in our glass factory are all old. Their families are all in Qiqian City. They are also loyal to Yangxia and will not be disloyal. Moreover, the military is also very strict in this area. Every one of them has a detailed record. Qin Ming also knew how serious the situation would be if something went wrong, so he immediately vowed. Good, I'm relieved when you do things. Yang Chendong patted Qin Ming's shoulder. This person was also an old man who had followed him for more than 10 years. All these years there were no problems, which was enough to prove his confidence. Winery. Manager Hong Shi brought in different degrees of liquor for Yang Chendong to taste. He introduced them to Yang Chendong and introduced them to him. Wine was one of the things that men loved no matter where they were. As long as they could afford it, almost everyone would want to drink it. Therefore, as long as the quality of the liquor was good, there was no need to worry about selling it. Yang Xia had opened up a large amount of grain fields. In addition to the appearance of potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, and other crops, the problem of food and clothing had been solved. Not only that, they were also constantly exporting their grain. Right now, the grain that the southern Ming dynasty needed was basically provided by the five-star army. When there was more grain, it was naturally not a good idea to store it in the granary. Using the excess grain to make wine was a better use. Good wine could be exchanged for silver and more money. Right now, the winery was also one of the main sources of income for Yang Xie. Sixth young master. Right now, not only do we have 10-degree liquor, 20-degree liquor, and even 55-degree liquor, we have also produced a lot of soft drinks and beverages. Together with the transparent glass bottles, the price will not be low. Hong Shi reported at the same time as he reported his work. Your train of thought is correct. But it's not enough. For example, we can change the packaging of the beverages. Bag packaging and paper packaging can be used. This way, we can lower the content of the drinks, and even normal people can buy them. This way, the sales will be better. Also, for the wine, we need to come up with more variations. Don't limit it to just a few types. We can divide it into high, medium, and low consumption levels. While serving the public, we can also earn more money. Yang Qindong thought about how the beverages in the future had already become a meal for normal families. Thus, he instilled his thoughts into Hong Shi's ears. Manager Hong Shi listened attentively, and the secretary beside him was also taking notes with a small notebook. After being in Crimson City for a long time, who didn't know that the sixth young master's words were the golden law? They were absolutely correct. Main food processing factory. Zhou Dai was accompanying Yang Qindong to inspect the food production line. Looking at the bags of instant noodles, ham sausages, and various canned food being packed separately, Yang Qindong also reached out and picked up a bag of instant noodles. After casually opening it and tasting it, he nodded. The taste is not bad. The quantity is also sufficient. Yes, these are all prepared for the army. The quantity is 30% more than what is usually sold. This is to let the soldiers eat until they are full. Zhou Dai stood on the side and said, just eating until they are full is not enough. You have to think of a way to eat well. The taste has to be varied. You have to consider the taste of the public as much as possible. Yang Qindong stood beside the production line and gave instructions. Air Force Training Ground. The original Eagle Division had been expanded many times. Although the current Air Force could not be compared to the Army and Navy, the number of people had reached tens of thousands. Coupled with their special mission, they had become a new powerful force that could not be ignored. The Navy Commander Tian Yu had the rank of Major General. Wearing a sky blue uniform, he was accompanying Yang Qindong and watching the performance of the Navy soldiers. Dozens of hot air balloons rose into the air, carrying out the various orders given by the ground command. Time and space were sometimes low, sometimes left, sometimes right. After reaching the predetermined position, packs of high explosives fell from the sky, blowing up the original targets one after another. Individual paragliders rose into the air, using the large or behind them that rotated like a fan. One soldier after another rose into the air. They could follow orders to the west or to the west to complete the high-altitude reconnaissance mission. The development of the Air Force started from scratch, and it was not easy to reach the scale it had now. In this regard, Yang Qindong affirmed their work and also made a request. He also agreed to the request of Tian Yu to lead the soldiers to participate in actual combat. From now on, with the addition of the Air Force, any enemy's so-called ambush would have nowhere to hide. They would also become the unique overlord of the sky. Young Family Academy. The first vice principal Wang Si accompanied Yang Qindong to walk around the entire academy. When Yang Qindong did not return to Qiqian City, Wang Si was actually the first leader of the academy. Under his leadership, the Yang family was constantly developing. It was different from the Great Ming Dynasty's knowledge, which was mainly based on the 8 classics, the 4 books, the 5 classics, and other sages. The studies in the Yang Family Academy were divided into different categories: Chinese mathematics, geography, science, biology, physics, chemistry, agriculture, labor, and so on. The scholars of Yang Xie had long been used to studying many subjects. This represented the comprehensive development of morality, aspiration, physical fitness, aesthetics, and labor. Only such a talent could have everything. Only learning Confucianism in the Yang Xie had no future. So far, the Yang Family Academy had cultivated many talents for the Yang Xie. Once the students graduated, those with excellent results would be quickly snatched up by various departments. Because of this, more and more young people liked to apply for the academy. With this repeated cycle, the academy had entered a very normal track. Now the students of the Yang Family Academy had flooded the various departments, and they all considered themselves as Yang Qindong students, gradually forming a strong force. One could imagine that after a few years, when this group of people fully matured, they would become a powerful force. Perhaps even the future Huang Pu would not be able to compare. Not only do they have to study, but also have them participate in labor and experience the real life of the common people. Every graduate has to live in an ordinary village for at least a month. This is a hard and fast rule. There are no conditions. Many things can only be said if one truly understands it. If one only reads it from books, not only will it not be deep enough, it will also be easy to be separated from reality. Yang Qindong wanted students who knew what to do, not students who only knew how to talk but not do, or students who only knew how to do but not speak. Yes, this student will remember. Wang Xi nodded heavily. Seeing that Wang Xi was almost 30 years old, Yang Qindong suddenly stopped and thought of something. Has your grandfather already retired? Wang Xi's grandfather was Baiming's Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, who held a high position and power. In the past, he was the person Wang Ji respected the most. He always thought that one day he could be as capable as his grandfather. But ever since he came into contact with Yang Shui, this thought slowly began to waver. Especially after coming to Crimson City, he no longer envied his grandfather. In his opinion, that position was a waste of life. It was just like a machine going to work and getting off work every day. It was really meaningless. Chapter 1366. Unlike now, where he could come into contact with new knowledge and new things every day in the academy. Every time he figured out a problem, regardless of whether it was a teacher or a student, they would all jump up in excitement. A new window would be opened in front of him, and a new field of knowledge would be unlocked. To him, who thirsted for knowledge, this was the most satisfying thing. It was many times better than working in the yamen every day. Wang Xi was very satisfied with his current life, but that did not mean that he did not love his grandfather, especially since this grandfather had been very good to him since he was young. Now that he heard Yang Qindong ask, he replied, "Yes, grandfather has already resigned, and has returned to his ancestral home to enjoy his old age." "And then is it possible to bring him here? You should know that regardless of whether it is the climate or the conditions, this place is much better than the other side." This was the Minister of Personnel, and no one knew the officials of Baiming better than him. If such a person was brought to his side, if he could help him, the benefits would be a lot. Of course, Yang Qindong still respected this old man very much. As for the other party, he would not force him before he agreed. Hearing Yang Qindong's suggestion, Wang Xi's eyes couldn't help but flicker, but he quickly calmed down. He knew his grandfather too well. If there was something he didn't want to do, no one could force him to do it. Since he didn't know his grandfather's thoughts, he didn't make any promises. Instead, he said honestly, "Teacher, I haven't discussed this matter with my grandfather, but I will write a letter soon to ask for his opinion." "Sure, if you have any difficulties, you can also look for City Lord Yu Qian and ask him to write a letter as well. After all, we were once colleagues, so we will definitely have more in common," Yang Qindong suggested with a smile, causing Wang Xi to nod his head continuously. Following that, the bank, the art troupe, the bicycle factory, the tobacco factory, and so on all left behind Yang Qindong's footprints. With Yang Qindong's guidance, the various units became even more motivated. After receiving encouragement and advanced guidance, the various industries in Crimson City developed a vigorous attitude towards development. 2 months later, in the 3rd month of the year 1461, Yang Qindong personally brought all the officers above the rank of major to the largest square in the city. Here, a stone tablet that was tens of meters tall, and a large hall that occupied an extremely large area was located. The monument was a monument to heroes, and the hall was a memorial hall for heroes. The ashes of all the heroes who died on the battlefield were placed here for future generations to pay their respects. It was precisely because these martyrs were not afraid to shed blood and sacrifice that the Yang Xie party was able to grow stronger, and the people were able to live a better life. Anyone with a conscience would never forget these heroes who had sacrificed themselves. On the first day of every month, a large number of officers would come to pay their respects. Even during normal times, there would be people taking turns to come every day. They would either burn paper money or offer flowers to express their gratitude. According to the plan, the Navy would set off from the port and begin their journey of expansion. Yang Qindong brought all the officers here to let them receive a re-education of their thoughts. He wanted them to understand what their mission was, and to let them know that compared to the fact that they were still alive, it was already a very fortunate thing. In order for the people of Wuxia to live a better life, they needed to open up more land and territory. During this process, they had to display the spirit of not being afraid of hardships and not being afraid of death. If they were unfortunate enough to die in battle, their corpses would be transported back here to be worshipped by future generations forever. On the square, hundreds of thousands of people from all walks of life gathered here. They personally witnessed their leader, Yang Qindong, offer a wreath to the martyrs. Following that, all the officers above the rank of major swore, shouting slogans that they were not afraid of death, and made all sorts of promises to the martyrs. On that day, many of the people present cried. On that day, many of the officers present had their eyes wide open. On that day, Yang Qindong knelt in front of the monument and secretly swore in his heart that the martyrs would not die in vain. Wuxia would one day unify the world. At that time, even more people would come to pay respects to them. At that time, their heroic souls would be forever remembered by future generations. A day later, all the officers above the regiment level who stayed in Qiqian City gathered in the Army headquarters auditorium. Yang Qindong personally taught them what the main contradiction was, what the secondary contradiction was, what the unity of thought was, what the united front was, how to build a base, how to fight a land revolution, how to mobilize the power of the people, how to do diplomatic and united front work well. 2 days later, under the personal escort of Yang Qindong, the Marines set off. Deputy Commander Gao Xiong personally led the team. Several naval divisions were ready to set off. Countless warships filled the military port, blowing their horns and raising their white sails as they set off with the wind. Wuxia's struggle for hegemony on the sea began. 2 days later, Yang Qindong was in the palace accompanying the Princess Huyen. A telegram that had just been received was personally delivered to him by Beta Persei. In December, Luan Xiaoyu was pregnant. In January, Xiao Yuxue and Dong Xiangxiang were pregnant. In February, Tuoya and Su Maner were pregnant. In March, Junko and Huyen were pregnant. Yang Qindong was like a hard-working little bee, constantly wandering around the harem, using his strength as a grand master to continuously sow seeds. Fortunately, the results were remarkable. Other than the second wife, Qiao Yin, who already had Lele, all the other wives were pregnant. Even Huyen, after having Yang Bo and being pregnant with her second child, was as happy as a little girl. Yang Qindong also took more time to accompany her. When the telegram appeared, Yang Qindong's expression did not change, but a trace of doubt flashed through his eyes. If it was not an important situation, Beta Persei would not dare to send the telegram at this time. But he still came, which could only prove one thing. Something had happened. He reached out and took the telegram. After casually glancing at it, he put it aside as if nothing had happened. Next, he accompanied Huyen to watch the new song and dance arranged by the Arts and Crafts Regiment for a while. Seeing that the other party was tired, he asked Xiaoqing and other personal maids to send the madam to rest. After Huyen's back was out of sight, Yang Qindong turned and went to the office in the hall. As soon as he entered the large study, Yang Qindong looked at Beta Persei, who followed closely behind him, and asked, "What's going on in the Far Eastern region?" "Young master, after receiving the telegram from Governor Chenbo, I immediately asked the Security Bureau and the CIA. There was soon news from there. It should be that Tang Sheng, the commander of the 4th Cavalry Division of the Far Eastern Army, suddenly rebelled and joined forces with the cavalry of a Siberian Mongolian tribe, Konhulihan, to attack the state capital of Archung. After a bloody battle, Governor Chenbo disappeared, and now the Far Eastern region is basically in the hands of Tang Sheng." Beta Persei obviously came prepared and reported after investigating the specific situation. "Khan of Siberia? Tang Sheng rebelled?" Yang Qindong muttered. After an unknown period of time, a cold voice suddenly sounded. They are courting death. At this time, Wuxia was so powerful that others were afraid that they would find trouble with him. How could there be people who were so blind as to find trouble with him? There was also that commander called Tang Sheng. He was in such a high position, yet he still rebelled. Yang Chendong really couldn't figure it out, and was even angrier. However, there were some things that anger alone couldn't solve. What did Tiger's Mane say? Tiger's Mane's new army was in the beginning city, which was the closest to the Far Eastern region. If there was a problem there, they should have reacted immediately. Perhaps the army to quell the rebellion had already been sent out. Beta Persei lowered his head, his expression a little ugly. What do you mean by this and that? I'm asking you, how many reinforcements are you going to send for the new army? Who will lead them? Yang Chendong wished that he could give Beta Persei a kick. Why did it take so much effort to speak? Where did his usual straightforwardness and cleverness go? Beta Persei didn't dare to dodge Yang Chendong's kick, nor could he dodge it. He straightened his body and said, "Young master, regarding the matter of sending reinforcements, the officers of the new army have different opinions, so much so that Tiger's Mane can't force a decision." The so-called difference in opinions was still pleasant to hear. The truth was that everyone thought that the Far Eastern region was too poor and too far away, so there was no point in occupying it. Think about it. What did they get after occupying the Far Eastern region all these years? Other than the last time when the beginning city was in danger, Commander Chen Bo brought 4 cavalry divisions to help. He had always been asking for things. After careful calculation, with so much manpower, material resources and financial resources, not to mention one army, even 3 armies could be built. The beginning city had begun to be self-sufficient through its own efforts. Neither Tiger's Mane nor Yumian wanted to continue to ask for help from Qiqian City. They wanted true economic independence. The fertile fields on the grasslands and the various small factories in the city were where their confidence came from. However, they still had to provide the Far Eastern region with goods, which greatly dragged them down, making it difficult for them to become economically self-sufficient. Now that there was a problem, wasn't this an opportunity to shift the blame? This was also the reason why they hadn't sent any reinforcements, even though they had heard the news from the other side. Beta Persei's words were vague, but Yang Chendong was very clear in his heart. However, he didn't blame Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and the others for this matter. If he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame them for not having enough foresight and not knowing the benefits and importance of the Far Eastern region. Make the arrangements. After 3 days, we will set off. This trip to the Far Eastern region, since no one is willing to do it, this young master will go personally. Yang Chendong said with determination. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but the problem related to the Far Eastern region should also be solved. Not only that, but the problems of the Golden Horde and the Ross country should also be solved this time. Although he had given Chen Bo a lot of ideas, it seemed that the effect wasn't very good. As a mission in the future, he had been to the Far East region and knew the approximate location of some of the minerals there. Once the minerals were developed, the economic returns would definitely shock Tiger's Mane and the others. He wanted to use facts to tell some people that Yang Chendong's decisions had always been very correct. Chapter 1367. Yes. Beta Persei had long since had enough of staying in Resin City. Although his wife and children were in Resin City, he was only in his early 30s. It was not the time for him to retire yet. What he should do the most was to make meritorious contributions. Where would meritorious contributions come from? Staying in Resin City was just for experience. How could it be as strong as leaving this place and opening up new territories everywhere? Beta Persei excitedly went to make arrangements. Yang Chendong sat in the chair in the study room. After thinking about how many troops and supplies he needed to bring with him, he quickly got up. Since he was going to leave, he had to talk to the madam. Over the years, they had always been apart more than together. Speaking of which, he owed them too much. No, he had already thought about it. When everything was on the right track, he would take the madam to walk around and accompany them. In the bedroom of the madam, Princess Huyen, Yang Chendong dismissed everyone. Even Yang Bo went out to play with the maids, leaving only Yang Qindong and Hu Yan cuddling together. Hu Yan had just been found to be pregnant. It was the time for her to stay still and not move. At this moment, she was half lying in Yang Qindong's arms with a face full of happiness. I'm sorry. After a long silence, Yang Qindong finally spoke. Dong Shuai, are you leaving again? After just one sentence, Hu Yan's expression changed and her body trembled. But she quickly hid all her panic. Ever since she married Yang Qindong, she knew that her man was a man who could do great things. He must not be restrained by his love life. Towards Yang Qindong, the 8 madams each had their own way of addressing him. For example, the 2nd Madam Qiao Yin was used to calling him Young Master. The 5th Madam Tuoyu was used to calling him War God. The 6th Madam Wan Xiaoyu liked to call him Big Brother. The 8th Madam Junko was willing to call him King. And the other madams called him husband. Hu Yan had always called him Dong Shuai. The nickname Dong Shuai was given to Yang Qindong when he first showed his talent in biming. At that time he was famous for his talent and won Hu Yan's heart. Yes, there are some things that have to be done. It's just that I'm really worried about leaving you guys behind. Yang Qindong didn't deny it. He was really worried. This time was different from the past. 7 out of the 8 madams were pregnant. How could a father be at ease? Don't worry, everything in the palace has been handed over to Qiaoyin. With Tai Qingyi, the head of the palace's guards, there won't be any problems. Dong Shuai, just do what you think you should do. This concubine will wait for your return in the palace. Although she was very reluctant, Hu Yan still spoke in such a magnanimous manner. This was the overall situation in the eyes of a woman. All right. Yang Qindong clearly knew that Hu Yan was comforting him. He couldn't help but use a bit of strength in his hands and hug the other party tighter. Yang Qindong was about to leave. Before he left, he quietly stayed with the madams for a while. He also called Qiaoyin and Tai Qingyi over and instructed them to absolutely ensure the safety of the palace. He also called Yang Wu over in front of the 2 of them and left an order. Without special circumstances, no one was allowed to enter the palace and disturb the madams. He believed that Yang Wu would know what to do after receiving the order. It was just 3 days, and it passed very quickly. On the morning of the 4th day, the Navy's warship was already waiting at the harbor. Yu Qian, Lung Song, and the rest of the army's higher-ups came to send them off. Mr. Yu, you have to take care of your body. Leave the small matters to the subordinates. You only need to decide on the big matters and grasp the direction. Yang Qindong held Yu Qian's hand and repeatedly reminded him. The reason why Yang Qindong was able to expand his territory outside was precisely because the headquarters had someone as big as Yu Qian to stabilize the situation. Otherwise, how could he be at ease at the front? Yes, Your Majesty, please rest assured. This subject understands. Yu Qian said with an excited expression. This time, with Yang Qindong's return, the relationship between the 2 of them was clearly closer than before. Both of their political ideals gradually walked together, and there was no longer any gap between them. This could be seen from the way Yu Qian addressed Yang Qindong. Yang Qindong finally left and boarded the Navy's speedboat that had just entered service. From this boat out of Crimson City, it arrived at the port of Sea City in the 3 eastern provinces. Its speed was more than 2/3 faster than before. Beginning City, Tiger's Mane, Yumian, and Yangtze closed the door once again and discussed the problem of the Far Eastern region. Ever since the last telegram requesting for help, there had been no news from there for a long time. They could only receive some auxiliary and unimportant news from the Security Bureau and the CIA. Fortunately, there was no news about Governor Chen Bo's arrest. Presumably, there must be a problem with the radio station in Governor Chen's hands. Otherwise, it wouldn't have taken so long to contact us. Now, it seems that we need to send someone to find him and restore contact. Yang Si was the first to speak. He was also the only one among the 3 who supported sending troops to the Far Eastern region. As a servant of the Yang family, the person Yang Si admired the most was Yang Qindong. In his eyes, as long as it was the young master's decision, it was the right thing to do. As long as it was the young master's decision, it was definitely the right thing to do. Since the young master was the one who decided to establish the Far Eastern region and invested so much, If something happened there, it must be saved and rebuilt. Saving people was a must. This was also what Tiger's Mane and Yumian wanted. However, if it wasn't to rebuild it, the two of them had some opinions. Seeing that Yangtze proposed to send people again, Tiger's Mane sighed and said, "We will definitely send people, but how many people to send and what kind of goal we want to achieve, we still need to discuss this matter properly." That's right. It's not difficult to save Governor Chun, but if we want to establish a foothold there again, I'm afraid that we won't be able to do it with too few troops. However, considering the difficulty of transporting supplies, if we send too many troops, the logistical pressure will be great. It's really difficult. Yumian also spoke. He spoke from the perspective of a city lord, and from an economic point of view. Tiger's Mane was the new army commander, so his focus was more on military matters. He was particular about using the least amount of troops to obtain the greatest benefits. Just from this point alone, there was no need to fight for the Far Eastern region. Yumian was the same. From an economic point of view, investment and income were not proportional, so there was no point in rebuilding the Far Eastern region. The two of them still had the same opinion as before, so Yangtze, who originally wanted to say something, could only shut his mouth. All right, since that's the case, I'll send a report to the young master, and ask the young master to make a decision. Yangtze didn't have any intention of fighting for it. He didn't want this matter to affect his relationship with Tiger's Mane and Yumian. However, he believed that once this matter was reported to the young master, there would definitely be a result. At that time, with the young master's orders, who would dare to disobey? The telegram was sent out, but what was puzzling was that every telegram was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no reply at all. After a few consecutive telegrams without any results, Tiger's Mane and the other two couldn't sit still anymore. Regardless of whether it was possible or not, they should at least send a telegram. What did they mean by not asking? Without a definite answer, Tiger's Mane and the other two couldn't help but feel flustered. Did this mean that the sixth young master was dissatisfied? We can't wait any longer. We have to confirm the number of troops to send out. Tiger's Mane once again called the three of them together and said this. It was almost April. The road leading to the Far Eastern region had already been opened, and the snow was dissipating every day. It was time to attack. How many people should we send? How much logistical support do we need? Can we win in a single battle? Should we bring Governor Chun and the others back, or rebuild the Far Eastern region? How much financial resources and population do we need? Commander Tiger, please give me an accurate number so that I can prepare. As soon as Tiger's Mane opened his mouth, Yumian's questions were thrown out one after another, causing him to choke and his expression to become more and more unsightly. Previously, Tiger's Mane and Yumian had the same opinion. However, now that he hadn't received Yang Chendong's order, Tiger's Mane was a little uncertain. He couldn't stand the pressure and wanted to make a move. Yumian was a little unhappy. He threw out these questions with the intention of letting the other party wake up. As the city governor of the first city and the leader of the local area, Yumian wasn't wrong to say this. He always had to estimate the gains and losses. He couldn't make a decision on a whim. If that was the case, once there was a loss, it might shake the foundation of the first city and ruin the good situation. Tiger's Mane stopped talking and looked at Yangtze for help. Yangtze turned a blind eye to this. He knew very well what kind of person Yumian was. Sometimes, he would even dare to argue with the young master over a problem. He didn't think that he could make Yumian retreat with just his face. That person has to be sent. Tiger's Mane, who didn't get a response, pulled a long face and looked at Yumian. When he spoke, he was already a little weak. We have to send someone. No matter what, the Far Eastern region is a part of Yangtze. The brothers there are our brothers. However, what I mean is that we just have to save the people. As for the Far Eastern region, it's better to give it up first. When our first city is completely strong in the future, we can think of a way to station troops there. Yumian finally said what he meant. Yangtze had indeed developed rapidly over the years. Countless new things had appeared and they had made a lot of money. However, at the same time, the military expenditure was also very large. Every time they occupied a new place, a lot of money and manpower would be invested in the construction there. For this reason, it wasn't that there weren't other voices. In fact, those who made this sound didn't even account for the number of people. Some people thought that Wuxia was already big enough. What they needed to do now was to stabilize everything. After the territory was consolidated, it wouldn't be too late to send troops to expand. It would just be a few years later. However, this method was stable and there wouldn't be any problems. Chapter 1368. However, this voice had always been suppressed by Yang Chendong. He did not care if others said that he was militaristic, nor did he care if others said that he was a murderous demon king. This was because no one in this world knew better than him how vast this world was, and how many places there were that needed to be conquered. Yang Chendong single-handedly created Wuxia and established the 5-star army. If even his actions were questioned by his subordinates, one could imagine that if he could not conquer more territory in his lifetime, once he was no longer around and his successor was replaced, would he still have the courage and influence to unify the entire world and make the Han people the only ruler? Yang Chendong did not dare to think about it. He could only lower his head and do it. Fortunately, although the price to pay for occupation and expansion was not small, the businesses in Crimson City were diversified, and the money they earned was enough to cover the expenses of the war. For example, provinces such as Vietnam and Laos, after being ruled for many years, had already reached a balance of income and expenditure. If they continued, they would be able to provide returns to Crimson City. Coupled with his powerful charisma and influence, no one dared to publicly criticize the expansion. Even he had to put in so much effort, so he did not dare to leave this matter to others. This was the reason why the primordial city had not sent out any reinforcements, even though there was a problem in the Far Eastern region. After Yu Mian expressed his thoughts, Tiger's Mane could only nod his head in agreement after a moment of silence. Alright, then why don't we do as City Lord Yu says? Without a better suggestion, although Yu Mian's method was a little conservative, it was safe. Before Yang Chendong's telegram arrived, it would be better to do as he said. Yang Si did not say yes or no. He was like a mute the entire time, not saying a word. He also did not understand what the young master meant. But his intuition told him that the young master of the Far Eastern region would not give up. Otherwise, he would not have sacrificed so much over the years. Yang Si didn't say anything, so Tiger's Mane and Yu Mian made the decision. After some discussion, they decided to send the 101st Division out to assist the Far Eastern region. They wanted to find Governor Chun and bring him back. The 101st Division's commander was Lu Zhua. He was an extremely senior general. He was a calm and steady person, and it was more than appropriate for him to complete the rescue mission. They quickly came to a decision. The 101st Division was ordered to prepare for battle. 7 days later, the army would head north to the Far Eastern state. When an army set out on an expedition, it was necessary to deploy troops, allocate provisions, prepare equipment, clothing, and so on. It was a very tedious matter. Fortunately, the 101st Division was stationed near First City. Otherwise, they would need at least half a month to 20 days to complete the preparations. Time passed day by day, and with the City Lord's Manor and the Logistics Command headquarters doing their best to prepare, the various resources that were to be taken away were loaded onto carriages. Because the journey was rather long, and the roads were not easy to travel on, just the logistics alone had prepared a total of 1,000 carriages. It was said that this was only the first batch. There would be a second and third batch after that. The army set out. Along the way, the men and horses ate and chewed. Every day was a huge expenditure. Just from this point alone, Yu Mian's idea of retreating from the Far Eastern region was not considered a mistake. After preparing for a full 6 days, seeing that the army was about to set off tomorrow, Tiger's Mane called Commander Lu Zhua to his office. The two of them discussed the route of the march, how to protect themselves after entering the Far Eastern region, how to find Chun Bo and the others, and how to retreat safely. Just as the two of them were discussing enthusiastically, the office door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. Tiger's Mane, who was listening to Commander Lu Zhua's opinion, showed a displeased expression. Pushing the door open without permission was a sign of impoliteness. When he wanted to reprimand them, he could only suppress his dissatisfaction when he saw that it was Yang Si. Tiger's mane still wanted to say something, but before he could speak, Yang Si spoke first. Tiger's mane, Commander Liu, there's no need to discuss further. The young master is here. Huh? What? Hearing that there was no need to discuss further, Tiger's mane was stunned. When he heard that the young master was here, his mind suddenly went blank. His first thought was that he had heard wrongly. Wasn't the sixth young master in the revered city? He had already heard that 7 out of the 8 madams were pregnant. It had to be said that the young master was indeed proficient in both literature and martial arts. He was actually so powerful in this aspect. Because of this, everyone thought that the young master should be in the palace of the revered city to accompany the madams. Who would have thought that he would suddenly appear in the origin city? That's right, the young master is here. Commander Chiovi of the Vanguard Black Cavalry has already entered the city. Let's go out and welcome him. When Yang Si said this, he was also somewhat in disbelief. However, when he saw Chiovi, all his disbelief disappeared. As the commander of the 1st Battalion of the Black Cavalry, wherever he appeared often meant that the young master would appear there. This was an indisputable fact. Hearing that even Chiovi had appeared, how could Tiger's mane not believe it? He quickly put away the map of the Far Eastern region and walked out of the office while tidying up his military uniform. At the same time, his expression was very unpleasant. At this time, the young master had arrived in the origin city. This could only mean one thing. The young master was dissatisfied with their work. As the young master's most trusted person, he felt that his face had lost all light, and even felt a burning pain. With a gloomy face, Tiger's mane did not care about discussing the war with Lujua. At this moment, he strode out of the army headquarters and went straight to the east gate of the origin city with Yang Si. On the way, they met Yumian, who was also worried and had an unpleasant expression. However, this time, the 3 of them did not even want to exchange pleasantries. They just nodded to each other and strode forward. At the east gate, the travel-worn Yang Chendong appeared in the distance with the Black Cavalry. In order to rush for time, Yang Chendong and the others stopped their horses but did not stop. Along the way, they changed their horses countless times and finally arrived at the origin city in the shortest time possible. Compared to the last time he left, Yang Chendong's face was also full of displeasure. Obviously, Tiger's mane, Yumian, and Yang Si's response to the problem of the Far Eastern region this time made him very dissatisfied. However, although he was dissatisfied, Yang Chendong did not intend to blame the 3 of them. After all, not everyone knew the importance of the Far Eastern region like he did. Even in the future, the Far Eastern region accounted for more than a quarter of the entire country. It was not an exaggeration to say that once it was occupied and stabilized, it would not be far from unifying the entire Russia. Of course, the current Russia could not even be called a country. It was still living a difficult life under the oppression of the descendants of the Mongolian cavalry. At the east gate, Tiger's mane and the other higher-ups of the origin city stood there. As soon as they saw Yang Chendong appear on the white dragon, the people led by Tiger's mane knelt on the ground with a plop and pleaded guilty. Let's talk about it after we enter the city. Yang Chendong only looked around before he rode on his horse. This time he did not dismount from his horse and exchange greetings with everyone, which already showed his dissatisfaction. He could not blame these people, but it was necessary to give them some face. Otherwise, if he encountered such a thing in the future, he did not know what would happen. Tiger's mane and the others followed behind Yang Chendong with a nervous heart, and arrived at the palace courtyard of the origin city. When the high-ranking and middle-ranking people were rejected outside the palace, and only Tiger's mane and the other 2 were left, they once again knelt on the ground with a plop. Beta Persei had already found a chair for Yang Chendong to sit down and then stood aside. This time Beta Persei was also very angry. The young master had requested the development of the Far Eastern region. He had also invested a lot of manpower and material resources, and stationed an army there. When something happened there, the origin city was the closest. They should have sent reinforcements as soon as possible. Why did it take so long? No matter what reason they had, It was clear that they did not believe in the young master. Based on this point, Beta Persei had no intention of pleading for Tiger's Mane and the others. As the one who had followed Yang Qindong for the longest time, Beta Persei knew better than anyone else how powerful the sixth master was. Although his mind was also full of doubts about some things, it was undeniable that the young master's strength had completely conquered him. Even if the young master brought him and the two of them to rush into the Great Ming Palace, he would not be full of doubts like others. Instead, he would carry out his orders without blinking. Beta Persei's ability to execute and obey orders was something that Yang Qindong admired very much. Moreover, this person was also smart. He knew what could be said and what could not be asked. This was the main reason why Yang Qindong was willing to keep him by his side. Yang Qindong had no intention of letting the three of them get up. He sat there and listened to their reports. This was especially true for the Northern Ming dynasty. When Yang Qindong left, he had already laid the foundation for everything. The defeat of Baiming's 400,000 troops had greatly damaged Baiming's arrogant momentum. In the end, they had to give in and sent Shi Heng to discuss reconciliation with Yumian. 1 million Han people had been sent over, and Gao Yu and the others were also sent back to Baiming's imperial court. Naturally, it was impossible for the soldiers who had surrendered to be returned. With people and a sufficient population, many things would be easier to do. The land around the origin city was once again reclaimed in large amounts. A large number of potatoes and corn were planted. It could be imagined that the origin city would be self-sufficient in terms of food in the future. His Majesty personally reported the matter, but there was no joy on his face. All of this was arranged by Yang Qindong before he left. He was just carrying out his orders and did not deserve any credit. Yumian had just closed his mouth after reporting when Tiger's Mane, who could not wait any longer, had already opened his mouth. "Young master, I'm guilty. Please punish me." About the Far East. Well, you don't have to worry about the problems in the Far East. The new army group will take good care of the origin city, and be the logistics officers of the new army and the new 5 armies. Yang Qindong simply waved his hand. Chapter 1369. Young Master are new. Knowing that Yang Qindong was displeased, Tiger's Mane still wanted to continue to fight for it. However, Yang Qindong spoke again. "This time, the young master will personally lead the troops, so you don't have to ask for instructions. By the way, this trip will use a lot of manpower. The required food and other things will be transported over from Red Nest City soon. Yes, everything will be handed over to the logistics command." As soon as he spoke, he only mentioned Yang Xi's name, and even excluded Yumian. Immediately, Yumian's expression became very ugly. Yumian was not as simple as Yu Qian's son. If that was the case, Yang Qindong would not have given him such an important task. At most, he would have spent more money to find a comfortable position for him to stay. But he didn't. Instead, he placed such an important burden on him. Just this point alone was enough to prove his ability. However, having ability did not mean that he was completely open-minded. At least, when it came to dealing with the matters in the Far Eastern region, he did not do very well. His thinking was too conservative. In this matter, Yang Qindong could also see that a person like Yumian had no problem keeping his position, but when it came to pioneering, he was still lacking a lot. Since that was the case, he would just guard his home well. This could be considered as making the best use of people. Tiger's Mane and Yumian, the two people who opposed increasing the investment in the Far Eastern region, had stepped aside. Only Yang Xi, who had always advocated for greater support, was placed in an important position. This already showed Yang Qindong's attitude. By the way, this time, the new Second Army will also be transferred to the front line of the Far Eastern region. The 2 cities that they are guarding, Shajing and Jingzhou, will belong to the new First Army's line of defense in the future. The 2 of you must guard them well. Yang Qindong seemed to have thought of something and added this sentence. After that, he turned around and left. They had not rested along the way, so they had to have a good sleep first. After Yang Qindong left, Yang Xi also had a lot of things to do and went to the logistics command to make arrangements. Only Tiger's Mane and Yumian were left behind. Needless to say, Tiger's Mane's performance this time had disappointed the young master. He regretted it 1,000 times. If he knew that the young master valued the Far Eastern region so much, he would not care whether the effort and the reward was proportional. He would have ordered the troops to send support long ago. Now not only himself, even the new Second Army's army, this time, even the new Second Army was thrown to the side. This made him feel very uncomfortable. However, he did not have to admit. After all, we mains he's not, he's unconvinced to the young masters, he to the tiger and to the main he and main. The Far Eastern region is too far away from us, and it's too barren. The more support we send there, the greater the losses will be. I'll talk to the 6th young master about this matter now. I want to dissuade him. As he spoke, Yu strode in the direction Yang Chendong left. Tiger's mane shuddered and followed closely. He also wanted to see if Yu could persuade the young master. If that was the case, it would at least prove that their decision this time was not wrong. Yang Chendong had just returned to the palace of the first city to wash his face. Just as he was about to go to the bedroom to have a comfortable sleep, Beta Persei came to report that Yu wanted to see him. No, the young master is tired. Yang Chendong waved his hand. Of course, he knew what Yu was going to say. He really did not want to argue with him now. It was not scary for a person to make a mistake. What was scary was not realizing one's mistake at all. However, seeing that his father was Yu Qian, he did not have the intention to argue with him. Young master, you'd better meet him. Governor Yu is kneeling outside the door. He said that if you don't meet him, he will kneel there until he dies. Beta Persei scratched his head and said with a headache. This Yu is really pedantic. After Yang Chendong heard this, he knew that he would not be able to sleep. He knew that the imperial censors of the great Ming dynasty were very powerful. Some of them were not even afraid of death in order to help the emperor. On the contrary, some people were proud of it. Even if the emperor ordered them to be killed, they were still excited that they could be written in the history books. Yang Chendong could not understand this at all. If this was not lunacy, then what was? However, he had not experienced it in all these years, so he thought that it was just a legend. Now there was finally one. Sigh. After a sigh, Yang Chendong knew that he had to meet this person. Let him in. Yang Chendong had no choice but to tidy up his clothes and said helplessly. Young master, Tiger Man is also kneeling outside. Look. Beta Persei reminded carefully. Come in, come in. One was to raise, two was also to let go. Yang Chendong decided to meet them and see what they had to say. Beta Persei walked out after receiving the order. After a while, Yu and Tiger Man walked into the hall. When they saw Yang Chendong, they knelt together. There's no need to kneel. If you have something to say, just stand up. Yang Chendong kindly dissuaded them. No, this time I must speak while kneeling. Yu was like a stubborn donkey that would not turn back until it hit a wall. He raised his head and straightened his neck. Okay. If you want to kneel, then kneel. Yang Chendong looked at Yu who looked like he would die if he did not kneel. He was too lazy to care. As long as the other party was happy, he could do whatever he wanted. Finally, he could kneel on the ground. Yu looked quite happy. He first straightened his body and then said, King, it was my idea not to send troops to support the Far Eastern region. It has nothing to do with Commander Tiger. This subject believes that the Far Eastern province is too far away. Moreover, half of the year is cold. There is no future for development in such a cold place. It is not worth investing too much in that place. Now that you have decided on the grasslands, you said that there are many mines near the beginning city. Now what we need to do is to stabilize the situation here, appease the people here, and open up grain fields and mines. We will win step by step. When we are strong enough, it will not be too late to think of a way to go north. King, it has always been a taboo for military personnel to go on an expedition. King, you can't put the army in danger because of your reputation. It is not worth it. As he spoke, Yu knelt on the ground and kowtowed. With just a few kowtows, blood seeped out of his forehead. If not for Tiger's mane, who was at the side, who reacted quickly, the consequences would have been even more serious. This scene opened Yang Chendong's eyes. In the past, he had seen in some history books that some upright officials had done all sorts of courting death in order to make the emperor accept them. However, that was only limited to written records. In this life he had become Bugnam of Gojoseon, but none of his subordinates had done so. He had attributed everything to his own wisdom. Because he was wise, his subordinates would not oppose his ideas. But now, Yumeon's actions had let him know that even if he thought that something was right, others would not necessarily think that way. He sighed in his heart. Do you think that what is right must be right? Of course, Yang Chendong would not say such words out loud. It would hurt the hearts of his subjects, and it was not something a ruler would do. What he wanted to do now was not to reprimand, but to reason. Using reason to convince the other party was using virtue to convince them. Ahem, Yumeon, you said that the Far Eastern Prefecture is a bitter and cold place. Then let me ask you, wasn't the beginning city a bitter and cold place in the past? When we first invested in building the city here, who would have thought that this place would have such a day? Since the beginning city can create miracles, why can't the Far Eastern Prefecture? It's different, it's different. Yumeon raised his head and said rather firmly. After all, the beginning city is only at the edge of the grassland. Whether it is by land or by water, it can be considered convenient. Moreover, this place has an extremely important military role. It is worth investing a little more here. Then who can say that the Far Eastern Prefecture has no important military geographical role? Who knows if the Far Eastern Prefecture will be as prosperous as the beginning city one day, or even surpass this place? Yang Chendong, who was familiar with the history of the future, knew very well that what he said was correct because the later generations had used their actions to prove all of this. Yumeon did not know about this. He just thought that Yang Chendong did all of this for the sake of his reputation. In his opinion, Bugnam of Gojoseon already knew that investing so much manpower and material resources in the Far Eastern Prefecture was a losing deal. It was just that he cared about his reputation and could not admit it. Now he still had to continue to invest more manpower and financial resources in the Far Eastern Prefecture. This was simply going further and further down the wrong path. As a person who was put in an important position, and was also a person who had received kindness, Yumeon had to stand up and speak properly. Although the king's reputation was important, he could not make mistakes again and again just because of his reputation and lose so many people and money. Although Yang Chendong's words were true, it was a pity that Yumeon, who thought that he had seen through everything, did not think so. Seeing that Yang Chendong was still talking about how good the Far Eastern Prefecture was, Yumeon's face showed disbelief. This scene was seen by Yang Chendong. He knew that Yumeon did not believe his judgment of the Far Eastern Prefecture at all. Since that was the case, no matter how much he explained, it was useless. He could only use practical actions to slap his face. All right, since City Lord Yu does not believe it, why don't we make a bet? Bet? This subject does not gamble. Yumeon shook his head and said with disdain. Your mother. Yang Chendong almost cursed out. In the face of such a stubborn subject like Yumeon, he really didn't know what to say. He was even more certain in his heart that he had to put on an act this time and succeed. Otherwise, with this victory, he was afraid that in the future he would not only have Yumeon under his command, but also Wang Mian and Li Mian. At that time, it would be even more difficult to do anything. This would also be a huge blow to his authority, which was something he absolutely did not want to see. No, this time, you have to bet even if you don't want to bet. Within 3 years, if the Far Eastern Prefecture is not self-sufficient and cannot prove its important military geographical position, then it will be considered as this king's loss. In the future, if you have any suggestions, this king will listen carefully, and can even give priority to your opinion. But if everything is proven after 3 years, then it will be your loss. At that time, when this king makes any decision, you cannot obstruct or interfere. How about it? Chapter 1370. Yumeon's problem had to be solved. Otherwise, there would be endless trouble in the future. Think about it. This time, even Tiger's Mane was persuaded by the other party. Yumeon himself did not know what would happen next time. It was only a 3-year time limit. It could be said that Yang Chendong was going all out this time. At least, that was what Yu Mian thought. It was only 3 years. So what if Bugnam of Gojoseon caused trouble for 3 years? Once he failed, there would not be such a rash thing in the future. It was worth it no matter how one looked at it. As for whether the 6th young master would win or not, Yu Mian did not consider it. He was involved in every bit of the construction process of the first city. There was no need to mention how many difficulties there were. This was because the first city was not too far away from Liaodong and Baiming's capital, so he could get help for everything he needed. Of course, the Far Eastern region would also receive the support of Qiqian City. With Bugnam of Gojoseon around, perhaps they would receive more resources. However, so what? After all, it was too far away. Could it really be like the first city? At least, Yu Mian did not believe it. No matter how one looked at it, this matter was worth a gamble. In the end, Yu Mian raised his head. Okay, I'll bet. After Yu Mian agreed to the bet, he could no longer interfere with Yang Chendong's every move. He finally relaxed, and the first thing he did was to sleep. No matter what he wanted to do, he had to have a good body first. This was a prerequisite. Just as Yang Chendong was about to fall asleep, news of his bet with Yu Mian had also spread. This was naturally Yu Mian's idea. He was afraid that Yang Chendong would go back on his word. He wanted to make this matter a reality. Yang Chendong did not know about this. Even if he knew, he would not care too much. Since he dared to say it, he was naturally confident that he could win. He slept all the way until night. When Yang Chendong woke up, he was full of energy. Beta Persei also took the opportunity to take a nap. When he saw that Yang Chendong had woken up, he carried a basin of water into the room. While his master was washing his face, he said, "Young master, Commander Tianhu, Commander Sherbei, and Commander Dai Kuo are all here. All right, summon them into the palace to discuss matters." Yang Chendong put down the towel in his hand, a confident smile on his face. After obtaining Yang Chendong's permission, the world's #1 cavalry division completed the task of expanding the army in a few months. This was all thanks to Baiming's Liaodong cavalry. In the battle with them, they had captured more than 40,000 people. Most of them had been educated and became glorious soldiers in the world's #1 cavalry army. After the expansion, the world's #1 cavalry army's combat strength had also increased exponentially. With more than 40,000 soldiers, they would not be afraid even if they faced enemies several times their number. Needless to say, they were already humiliated by the fake surrender. They were eager to change themselves through a big battle. They naturally responded to Yang Chendong's summons this time. From the commander to the soldiers, they were all full of fighting spirit. Dai Kuo was originally a member of the Far Eastern Army. This time, he was transferred by Yang Chendong. He wanted to take advantage of the other party's familiarity with the situation to enter the Far Eastern region. With the help of this division, they would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. When the three saw Yang Chendong in the main hall, they all excitedly saluted. Just from their appearance, they should have made sufficient preparations. Very good. Looking at your appearance, this king has an idea in his heart. Looking at the three, Yang Chendong also smiled. This was a confident smile. Presumably, you already know about the matter. Tang Xingjuan's change has caused the situation in the Far Eastern region to be unclear. It has also successfully provoked the anger of our 5-star army. This time, this king will personally go and let those who betrayed and dared to be our enemies know the consequences of angering our 5-star army. How about it? Do the three of you have the confidence to enter the Far Eastern region and show the might of our 5-star army? Yes. The three answered in unison. Their faces were filled with excitement before the big battle. Good. Let's discuss the matter of sending troops. While Yang Chendong was laughing, Beta Persei had already commanded several black cavalry to carry the map of the Far Eastern region. That night, everyone discussed until late into the night before dispersing. With the provisions prepared by the new army group for the 101st Division, Yang Chendong only rested in the first city for 2 days. Then he personally led the 2,000 Black Cavalry, a regiment under Division Commander Dai Kuo, and the 1st Division of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Army to the north as the vanguard. Bei Bei would lead the other 4 divisions of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Army, the other 4 regiments under Dai Qua, and the new 2nd Army to wait for the arrival of the supplies from Resin City. This time, Yang Chendong obviously put in a lot of capital. It was said that there were dozens of large ships and 2,000 carriages of supplies transported from Resin City alone. Besides, Yang Chendong also went straight to the north after leaving the first city. He walked along the road that was previously used to transport supplies. The road from the first city to the far eastern region was indeed not short, but the road was not that difficult to walk. On the contrary, they had been repairing the road. They even put in a lot of effort to lay railway tracks for some distance, so the speed of the army's progress was not slow. They walked 250 miles on the first day. This was naturally related to the fact that the vanguard army was lightly armed. However, if they did not have the foundation that they had previously laid, they would not be able to reach this speed. Only 3 days later, the vanguard army led by Yang Chendong personally entered the Chita region. They could already see the shadow of Yablonov Mountain from afar. At this time, the far eastern region was like a natural unpolished jade. It had not been exploited or damaged. Looking from afar, the tall mountains and forests were covered in a layer of light green. It was the appearance of the beginning of spring. Due to the climate, the winter in the far eastern region came much later than in the Great Ming Dynasty. Along the way, some places where the sun did not shine could still see a small amount of snow. Just based on this, one could feel the helplessness of the bitter cold. In such a climate, it was no wonder that no one occupied such a large territory. However, all of this would change with the arrival of Yang Chendong. Dai Qua had already left with a regiment of soldiers. As the vanguard of the vanguard, he had to find Commander Chenbo in the fastest way possible. Relatively speaking, the vanguard army led by Yang Chendong did not need to be in such a hurry. They only needed to follow the marks left by the other party. As the army entered the mountain range, the road became more and more difficult to travel. In the past, he had only read on the telegram that 2/3 of the supplies sent to support the far eastern region would be consumed on the way because of the road and distance. Yang Chendong did not believe it, but after personally making a trip, he had a deeper understanding of this. He also finally knew why Yu Mian would take such a big risk to stop him from supporting the far eastern region. Is the road difficult? Full of difficulties? Yang Chendong snorted. He liked challenges. If the mission was too easy to complete, it would lose its meaning. Just like in his previous life, sometimes in order to complete a task given by his superior, he could hide in a place without moving or eating for 36 hours. Compared to the hardships he had to endure back then, the hardships he was going through now were nothing. Send a telegram to Commander Shibi. Tell him to open up a path for the army. It shouldn't be too wide, but it should pass through the carriages first. If one wanted to be rich, one had to build a road first. This was a truth that could be used anywhere. The biggest obstacle preventing the development of the far eastern region was the transportation. If this problem could not be solved, then everything else was useless. After talking about the path, the vanguard army continued forward. After passing Yablonov Mountain, they saw the Stanov Mountain range. After a few days, they saw the Arden River. At this point, the scouts in the vanguard finally sent news that they had seen signs of human habitation. Beside the Arden River, the water plants had already developed from light green to dark green. It was also close to the water source. This kind of place was often the favorite environment of herders. It was reasonable to see humans in this kind of place. There weren't many people on the other side, at most 100 or so. When Yang Chendong led the vanguard to the riverside, the originally busy herdsmen panicked. The screams of women, the cries of children, and some young men had already rushed out of the tents with daggers in their hands, standing together at the outermost circle. Herders had their own rules. Once they encountered an unknown situation, the young men in the tribe would habitually protect the elderly, women, and children in the middle. This way, they could better protect the tribe in battle. Under normal circumstances, even if these young men were all killed, the elderly, women, and children would not be in any danger. They would only become the slaves of another tribe. It was the same everywhere. If one wanted to survive, they would always need a large number of people. Sometimes, The result of leading two tribes directly to war was just to snatch the population. Sometimes, a woman would be snatched more than a dozen times from her youth to her old age. So much so that she would forget who the first leader of the tribe was. The sudden appearance of the 5-star army, each riding a tall horse and holding a sharp saber in their hands, caused the young men of this small tribe to show fear and powerlessness. When one side's strength was thousands of times stronger than the other side, there was no need to fight this war. This also caused them to feel despair. Army, stop advancing. Beta Persei shouted after receiving the order. As soon as his loud voice came out, the cavalry warriors of the 1st Division of the world's cavalry army all stopped. Chapter 1371. Army, set up camp here. It was still Beta Persei's loud voice that reverberated through the air. It was good to have Beta Persei. At least he didn't need to use a loudspeaker to pass down orders. The 5-star army cavalry stopped, and so did the black cavalry. Only Yang Chendong, Beta Persei, Tian Hu, and Ba Dao Jiang rode their horses towards the herdsman's tent that was surrounded. The reason why it was called a tent and not a yurt was because these herdsmen were not of Mongolian descent. They were authentic Russian people with white skin. Among the crowd, other than Yang Chendong, it was the first time the other three had seen authentic Caucasians. They couldn't help but look at them curiously. However, Yang Chendong's expression was calm. He rode to the outermost periphery and looked at the 20 or so young men and asked, "Hello, can you speak Chinese?" Of course, this sentence was spoken in Russian. In his previous life, although Yang Chendong entered the military very early and didn't have the opportunity to further his studies in university, he was very familiar with the languages and cultures of various countries. This was what people meant when they said that reading 10,000 books was not as good as walking 10,000 miles. Yes, we can speak. One of the young men, who was more than 8 feet tall, looked at Yang Chendong with some vigilance and answered, "Very good." Yang Chendong didn't want to speak in bird language. It would be great if the other party could speak Chinese. He smiled and nodded. "Then I'll have to trouble you to take me to see your patriarch. Don't worry, I have no ill intentions." As he said this, Yang Chendong deliberately spread out his hands to show that he didn't have any weapons. He looked harmless and friendly. In fact, Yang Chendong really didn't have any intention of doing anything to these people. Unless they were hostile forces, otherwise, Yang Chendong would treat everyone he met here as his quasi-citizens. He could become a member of Yangxie at any time. How could he do something that would harm his own strength? Yang Chendong spoke politely, but the young man knew that he had no other choice. Seeing that the other party had over 10,000 cavalrymen, they didn't even need to lift a finger to deal with the 20 of them. All they needed to do was to spit at them. However, they didn't take action immediately. Instead, they wanted to settle the problem peacefully. This was already giving them a lot of face. "Please." Knowing that he had no other choice, the young man nodded in the end. He then turned around and led Yang Chendong back to the tribe's tent. Yang Chendong's party still had 4 people, and they were moving forward at a moderate pace. Although there were only 4 of them, each of them was more powerful than the other. Even if there were 10 times more of them, they would not be afraid, not to mention that there were only 20 or so saber-wielding youngsters. It was only a tribe of about 100 people. Their territory was not large. After traveling for tens of meters, they arrived at a tent that seemed to be in good condition. Yang Chendong happily dismounted from his horse and looked at the unguarded tent. He asked here, "Yes." The young man just nodded and didn't make much of an introduction. Then he looked at Yang Chendong with his big eyes. Obviously, he was paying attention to his every move. Hee, Yang Chendong chuckled, thinking in his heart, "Is this a test of my courage? Does he need to get a group of executioners to throw cups as a signal? But I don't think a small tribe like this has such strength." Yang Chendong, who didn't want to be looked down upon, decided to enter the tent to take a look. Beta Persei wanted to rush in first to observe the environment, but he was stopped by him. The 5-star army suddenly appeared here, so it was impossible for the other party to set up an ambush. And even if there was, with his strength as a grandmaster, why would he be afraid? Under the slightly scrutinizing gaze of the white man, Yang Chendong casually lifted the curtain, and walked in empty-handed. Just this boldness alone made the white man nod involuntarily. In his heart, his impression of Yang Chendong increased by a lot. He lifted the curtain and entered the tent. The first thing that caught his eye was a warm breath. With just a quick glance, Yang Chendong calculated that there were at least 30 people in the tent. Among them, women and children were the most, and the elderly were the least. Among them, the old man sitting in the middle of the tent stood out even more. Unlike the other people in the tent, when the other people's faces were filled with fear, the old man in the tent was calmly looking at Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong was also looking at the old man. He had a feeling that this old man must have a story. At least, he should have seen a lot of life and death situations. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so calm. Both sides were looking at each other, but no one spoke first. After about 10 breaths of time, Beta Persei finally couldn't help but shout outside the tent. "Young master, are you okay?" "I'm fine, go get some food and drink and send it in," Yang Chendong said without turning his head. Then he strode towards the old man and said with a smile on his face, "How should I address you, sir?" The old man had never seen such a calm and collected person entering the tent alone in his entire life. Unconsciously, he put away a short knife hidden in his sleeve and forced a smile on his face. "I'm Jurovsky, the chief of these people. How should I address you, sir?" Yang Chendong could indeed be called a distinguished guest. Just the golden robe on his body was not ordinary. It was dazzling. "So it's the chief of a tribe. Sorry for the disrespect. My name is Yang Chendong, and the people on the grassland also call me Tian Khan." Yang Chendong chuckled and strode to the old man's side. Then he casually sat down cross-legged. The moment the heavenly Khan's name was mentioned, the expressions of everyone in the tent changed. Then all sorts of fear and dread filled their faces once again. The name Tian Khan was now only used on the Mongols. As the Russians who had been ruled by the Mongols for more than 200 years, they both hated and feared them. It was not an exaggeration to say that many times, the words "Mongols are here" could stop babies from crying. Yang Chendong saw everyone's reaction, and he wanted to explain something. However, before he could speak, the chief called Jurovsky spoke first. Don't panic. He's different from ordinary Mongols." The chief said this in Russian, so Yang Chendong naturally heard it clearly. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "Why am I different from other Mongols?" "You can understand Russian?" The old man was shocked at first, but he quickly calmed down. It was obvious that in this area, the Russians and Mongols interacted with each other, and there was no distinction between them. The language was also a little messy. Just like how the Russians could speak Chinese and Mongolian, why couldn't they speak Russian? After the old man's reprimand, the tent quietened down. The chief looked at Yang Chendong and asked, "Tian Khan? Forgive this old man for being slow, but it seems that other than the noble Genghis Khan, no one else dares to use this name." "That's right." Yang Chendong smiled and nodded. He did not expect the chieftain to be so knowledgeable. However, there was one thing he had to correct. "I am not a Mongol. I am a Han Chinese. The title Heavenly Khan is a form of respect for me." "You're not a Mongol? You're a Han?" Jurovsky's face flashed with surprise for the first time. Then he thought of something and asked, "But what's the relationship between the Tian Khan and the Han people in the Far East?" He didn't expect the old man to know about the Han people in the Far East. Yang Chendong was also interested. "You know about them?" "That's right, we're together." When he heard Yang Chendong admit it, the chief's expression relaxed a little. He then said, "I've been to the Far East before. I even moved stones there and helped build the city. I even received some wages. The Han people there are not bad." "Wages? Not bad?" Yang Chendong didn't understand this information. Since the old man had been to the Far East, why didn't he live there? This was much better than wandering around. With doubts in his heart, Yang Chendong asked, "I didn't expect the chief to have helped there. But what's your impression of the place?" "Impression?" The chief seemed to recall and said, "It's not bad. At least they don't discriminate against us Russians. We're paid well. Although it's not as much as the Han people, it's still not bad. The city is very grand, but they don't allow us to live there. It's a pity. They don't allow you to live there." It was the first time Yang Chendong heard about this. He couldn't help but tremble. Yes, they don't allow us to live there. They say we're not Han people. When Jurovsky said this, his expression became a little gloomy. Hearing this, Yang Chendong smiled bitterly in his heart. He had told Chenbo that those who weren't of his race would have different intentions. However, it didn't mean that other people were not allowed to live in the city except for the Han people. Just like the beginning city, not all of the people living there were Han people. Many of them were from various Mongolian tribes. Even foreign merchants who came from afar were allowed to live in the city. As long as they could prove their identity and were not hostile or dangerous, they had the right to live in the city. The only difference was that they had to pay a higher price than the Han people. Yang Chendong knew why the Far East hadn't developed in the past few years. It must be because the policy was wrong. Speaking of Chenbo, his ability to lead an army and fight a war was not bad. However, he was better at persuading people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become one of the earliest political commissars in the Cold Front. It was a pity that he didn't have the experience of building a city, nor did he have the opportunity to learn. He just did it based on his own ideas. It was inevitable that he would take a lot of wrong paths. He also didn't know how to mobilize the people, and how to rely on the people to build a base. Chapter 1372. Thinking of this, Yang Chendong was even more confident about the 3-year agreement. In the past, he couldn't find the root of the problem, but now, he knew where the mistake was. As long as he corrected it, the development of the Far Eastern Prefecture would improve. Perhaps in less than 3 years, everything would change, and the Yang faction would have another large base of operations. If he wanted to change, he had to start with himself. Thinking of this, Yang Chendong stood up. Seeing Jurovsky's confused look, Yang Chendong stood up and bowed to him. This bow frightened Jurovsky. He would never forget that the Heavenly Khan had 10,000 cavalrymen just outside the tent. Now that he was on the chopping block, how could he accept such a great bow? Jurovsky wanted to get up and move out of the way, but Yang Chendong had already turned around and bowed to everyone in the tent. His voice rang out. What happened in the Far Eastern region was unfair to everyone. Since I, the Heavenly Khan, am here, I naturally have to change. Like this, if you want to settle down in the Far Eastern region in the future, you can come at any time. I swear in the name of the Heavenly Khan that when that time comes, as long as you are willing, you can live in the city. No one will chase you away. The so-called relying on the people to establish a base. It referred to uniting more people to fight against the enemy. Of course, it was not only the Hans who would unite, but also the local natives, the nearby Russians, and the Mongols who were willing to turn over a new leaf. In fact, uniting more people meant uniting more people who were willing to stop fighting, willing to work for peace, and willing to work for a better future. As long as they were willing, regardless of race, skin color, or region, they would unite together. Only then could the Far Eastern region gain the strongest influence in the shortest time possible, and establish a firm foothold. As for the problem of those who were not of the same race, that would be treated differently in the future. It would be fine as long as they did not give the foreign races more power and status. This did not mean that all the foreign races were enemies. If that was the case, there would be no need to talk about unifying the world. Furthermore, without the foreign races as a foil, how could the Hans show off their noble status? It was like returning home in glory. He had to let more people know about it. Otherwise, it would lose its original meaning of traveling in the night. What? Upon seeing Yang Chendong's vow, Jurovsky's eyes widened as he stared at Yang Chendong in disbelief. In addition to shock, there was also doubt in his eyes. Yang Chendong looked like he was in his 30s, and because his martial realm had reached the Grandmaster realm, he looked even younger. Could such a young man really do what he said? Most importantly, he didn't have the final say. Yang Chendong seemed to have noticed the doubt in the other party's eyes. He chuckled and said, "Yes or no, the chief only needs to go to the Far Eastern Prefecture to take a look." Jerovs nodded. "That's right, whether it's real or fake, we'll know when the time comes." At this moment, the curtain of the tent opened from the outside, and Beta Persei, Ba Daojiang, and Tian Hu walked into the tent with a pile of food. As long as the conditions were met, Yang Chendong would never wrong himself. This time, not only did he bring military provisions like compressed biscuits, but he also brought instant noodles, ham sausages, various canned food, and cigarettes. As the three of them entered, all kinds of food were quickly piled up together. These beautifully packaged food were all things that Jurovsky and his people had never seen before. Come have a taste. Yang Chendong took a ham sausage with a smile on his face, tore it open, and chewed it in his mouth. There were also some canned food, and after opening it, the aroma overflowed. Soon the sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard in the tent. The elderly and women could still restrain themselves as much as possible, but the children couldn't. Originally, because of the heavy snow, they ran out of food a long time ago. They mainly relied on catching some small fish by the river and killing some sheep and horses. How could they have seen such a dazzling array of good food? Eat as much as you want, this is originally for you. Yang Chendong couldn't help but chuckle when he saw the children's longing eyes and the adults' forceful control of their gazes. However, the children didn't move. Although some of them were already drooling, they still controlled themselves and only looked at Chief Jurovsky. Let's eat, Jurovsky said after a slight hesitation. Although he didn't know why the Heavenly Khan was so good to him, since the food was already in front of him, it would be a waste if he didn't eat it. Even if there was danger, he could die with a full stomach, right? After receiving permission, the children rushed towards the pile of food until their hands could no longer carry anything else. Then, they hurriedly returned to their mother's side. What followed was the sound of wolfing down the food. At this moment, even people who didn't have an appetite would feel hungry after seeing the children's performance. With food as a bridge, Yang Chendong quickly became friends with Jurovsky and the others. After 2 crude cigars were lit and placed in their mouths, Jurovsky no longer had any guard against Yang Chendong. Yang Chendong smiled. The first step was to remove their guard, and the second step was to strengthen their relationship. The next step was to integrate everyone and become one of them. Yang Chendong naturally had his own way of doing this. Simply put, it was nothing more than bait. Humans die for wealth, and birds die for food. After a person filled their stomach, the next thing to consider was how to obtain more wealth, so that they wouldn't starve anymore. Yang Chendong, who was very clear about the hearts of these herdsmen, used his trump card, silver. When Yang Chendong explained to Jurovsky that in the future, people other than the Han people would be allowed to live in the Far Eastern region. And not only that, as long as they acknowledged and returned to the Far Eastern region, they would be able to obtain an identity certificate, be allocated farmland, have a job, and have their own house. Jurovsky's eyes lit up when he heard this. Because of the geographical climate, the Far Eastern region was indeed vast and sparsely populated. However, this didn't mean that there were no people here. It was just that the place was too big and there were too many people, so it didn't attract much attention. However, if one were to count carefully, the population here would be at least a few 100,000, or even more. There were countless mountains, forests, and lakes here. There were wild beasts in the mountains and fresh fish in the lakes. These were all things that could fill one's stomach. Compared to the grassland, which only had green grass, it was many times better. Thus, this place had always been very attractive. The reason why people didn't come here was because the winter was too cold, and there was no guarantee of safety. However, if they had a place like the Far Eastern region, they would have their own house. Winter wouldn't be so cold, and there would be more guarantee of safety. Thus, how could such a place not be attractive? After hearing Yang Chendong's words, Jurovsky nodded solemnly. Thank you, Kantian. Don't worry, I will do my best to tell this good news to the other tribes. Yang Chendong was in a good mood after persuading Jurovsky without much effort. Then, he casually asked if anything special had happened in this place recently. This was just a casual question. Yang Chendong didn't think that Jurovsky would know anything. After all, they still didn't know that there was a mutiny in the Far Eastern region. Naturally, they wouldn't know too much about the outside world. What was unexpected was that this was just a casual question, but he actually managed to get some information out of it. Jurovsky actually said something strange. Heavenly Khan, it's not far from here by the Amuga River. Our tribesmen accidentally saw a group of Mongolian cavalry stationed there. Mongol cavalry? When he heard this, Yang Chendong's eyes lit up. He immediately asked, "How many people?" "A few hundred. You can ask Nikolaev for the specifics. He was the one who saw it." After saying this, Jurovsky said something to a woman beside him. The woman nodded and left. Not long after, Nikolaev walked into the tent. Nikolaev was the leader of the young people who blocked the five-star army. However, when he saw Yang Chendong this time, there was no longer any hostility in his eyes. Instead, there was only gratitude. He was oppressed and ruled by the Mongols since he was born. He lived like an ordinary person. Nikolaev's biggest wish was to be able to eat a full meal. Later he slowly grew up, but this small wish was never fulfilled. After marrying and having children with his wife, who was also of the lower class, he placed this wish on his son. He only hoped that one day, his son would be able to eat a full meal. Then even if he died, he would be able to close his eyes. Today this wish was finally fulfilled. Just now he saw his only son eat a lot of food until he couldn't eat anymore. When he was about to vomit, he cried. Ever since he was young, no matter what difficulties he encountered, even if he didn't eat for a few days, he had never cried. He still used all his strength to fight against fate. However, when he saw his son eat a full meal and his stomach bulge, he finally couldn't control his tears. He felt that his life was worth it. His wish was fulfilled. It was all thanks to Yang Chendong. Now that his benefactor had something to ask him, he naturally didn't hide anything. He told Yang Chendong about how he saw a group of Mongol cavalry a few days ago when he wanted to make something for his son to eat. Chapter 1373. There are about 300 of them. Everyone is riding a horse and carrying a sword. They are like the Khan soldiers. No, they are not as strong as the Khan soldiers. Many of them look like they are emaciated, and their clothes are old. As a poor man, Nikolaev was very attentive to details. After his description and Jurovsky's judgment, he finally determined that these people should be the Mongolian cavalry. Looking at their flags, they should belong to the Khan of Siberia's soldiers, and should be in the reconnaissance category. This should be a group of Mongolian cavalry. Their mission was to be in charge of guarding the perimeter, while keeping an eye on any suspicious targets. Once confirmed, they would call their friends and surround them. Phew! Yang Chendong let out a sigh of relief. With just this group of Mongolian cavalry, Yang Chendong could at least conclude that Chen Bo and the others were fine. Otherwise, these cavalrymen under the Siberian Khan wouldn't be so careful and set the perimeter so far away. "Are you willing to take us to find these Mongolian cavalry?" Since he knew the whereabouts of the enemy, Yang Chendong naturally would not let it go so easily. His gaze fell on the young man Nikolaev and asked. Nikolaev's face was a little nervous, but his answer was still straightforward. "Yes, I am willing to serve the Khan." He did not understand the five-star army, nor did he understand Yang Chendong. Nikolaev did not know what the consequences would be if he refused. If he angered the Khan, he was afraid that a simple order would be enough to kill all of his people. "Good. Come, take out some refined salt and sword for our friends." After Yang Chendong received a satisfactory answer, he laughed and waved his hand. Beta Persei turned around and left. Not long after, he brought the black cavalry to Chief Jurovsky with a few bags of well-packed refined salt and weapons. Refined salt, high-quality refined salt. Jurovsky unceremoniously opened the bag with the dagger in his hand. When he put his finger back into his mouth, he couldn't help but shout excitedly. In ancient times, salt and iron had always been the exclusive property of those in power. It was also one of the items that would not be exported or traded. And in remote places like the Far East, it was impossible to see them. Occasionally, some table salt would appear, but it was also coarse salt. Not only was its quality extremely poor, there were also many impurities in it. Good quality ones could be exchanged for several horses and sheep in one bag. Even so, it was not easy to get some. They were treated as treasures by the tribes. Yang Chendong had given him 4 bags, and each bag weighed at least 50 pounds. That was more than 200 pounds, and Jurovsky couldn't help but be excited. Jurovsky wasn't the only one who was excited. Nicholas and the others were also very excited. At this time, when they looked at Yang Chendong, There was a hint of trust in their eyes. With just this salt and iron, what was the point of selling their lives to the other party? It had to be said that in such a remote and bitter place, a human's life was the most worthless existence. Sometimes, for a mouthful of food, there would be people who would sell their dignity, strength, and life. Yang Chendong was willing to give out these things. In a sense, Nicholas' life already belonged to him. Without disturbing the celebration of this small tribe, Yang Chendong left the place. While ordering the army to rest, he also called Commander Tian Hu over and told him to prepare to send out a group of cavalry to follow Nicholas to the Embark River and take down the hundreds of Mongol cavalry. Just treat it as interest. Thinking about how the Far East province had suffered heavy losses from the surprise attack, a murderous intent flashed across Yang Chendong's eyes. It had always been him finding trouble with others. Since someone dared to provoke him, he definitely couldn't let them go. That night, this small Russian tribe didn't sleep at all. They surrounded the salt and iron just like that. Some of the young men also changed their rusty iron weapons under Jurovsky's orders and took out sharp cavalry swords. At this time, the things that Yang Chendong gave them were the hope of their tribe. They definitely couldn't lose them. Nicholas wasn't part of the people protecting the salt and iron. Not only him, but there were also 4 other people who didn't participate in the guard duty last night. Under Jurovsky's orders, they had a good night's rest. Today, they would follow the Heavenly Khan to deal with the Mongol cavalry. When Yang Chendong walked out of the tent in the morning, he was also full of energy. After reaching the Grandmaster realm, Yang Chendong could sleep peacefully in any environment as long as he wanted to. This was one of the main reasons why he was full of energy. Tian, who had already brought 1,000 cavalry, and was ready to set off at any time. This time he was going to personally lead the army to kill the enemy, leaving behind Division Commander Temu, with a sad expression. Nicholas had breakfast with the soldiers of the 5-star army, and he saw a satisfied look on the faces of the 5 soldiers. To them, they had never eaten such a delicious breakfast in their lives, let alone enough to fill their stomachs. When Nicholas and the others looked at the 5-star army soldiers after breakfast, their eyes were filled with envy. Beside the Wuxia River, there were many military tents here, and from time to time, one could see men in Mongol clothing walking back and forth. Sometimes they would even patrol around the river. Just as Yang Chendong expected, this was the Siberian Khan's cavalry unit. Their mission was to be in charge of the safety of this area, and at the same time, to see if there were any enemies from the Far East who escaped from here. However, their gazes were mostly on the inner side, and they did not pay much attention to the south of the Wuxia River. In their eyes, the enemy was in the north, not the south. As for whether or not someone would attack them from the south, it was not a problem for them to consider. There were 300 Mongol cavalry here. Although they were not elites, they were not something that anyone could target. For example, if Chieftain Jurovsky's 100-man tribe encountered them, they would probably run as far away as possible. If they wanted to face 300 Mongol cavalry who lived on horses all year round, they would need at least 1,000 cavalry to dare to take the risk. This was where Ahuchi's confidence came from. As the general of the 300 cavalrymen, he had never thought that anyone would harm him. All he thought about was how to find the Far East army that had escaped, and then strike at them to gain merit. As such, when Yang Chendong brought 500 black cavalry units to the south of the Wuxia River, Ahiki, who received the news, did not panic. Instead, he calmly walked out of the tent. When his subordinates reported that there was a cavalry unit in black armor outside the tent, Ahiki did not believe it and thought that it was an exaggeration. No matter if it was in Siberia or the Far East, iron was hard to find. If a normal person could get a good weapon, they would be proud of it for a long time. Who would be able to make armor out of iron? That was not a waste, but a luxury. Even the personal guards of Khan Hulihan only had leather armor on their upper bodies, which was already very enviable. With disbelief, Ahiki walked out of the tent. As expected, he saw a sea of black armor, and his eyes were filled with greed. Even though there were 500 cavalry, far more than the 300 he brought with him, there was no fear in his eyes. However, there was no trace of fear in Ahuchi's eyes. Perhaps it was because he had not had an opponent for many years, But he was used to treating everyone as prey. Even if there were 500 Black Knight Dragon Guards, he still thought the same. He was already used to treating this area as his own backyard. Ahiki did not think that there was anyone he could not defeat. Even if there were more enemies than him, and their equipment was better than his, it was still the same. War is not about who has better equipment. Ahiki muttered to himself. He then raised his right hand above his head and shouted, "All troops gather." The 300 Mongolian cavalry had already gotten on their horses. When they heard the general's order, they quickly gathered around Ahiki in groups of 10. It was said that small details revealed true ability. Just based on how quickly the Mongolian cavaliers gathered together, this was a group of well-trained cavaliers. This was especially so when there was a rare look of fearlessness in their eyes, and this was something that was rarely seen among the 5-star armies. Haha! Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon, also laughed. He did not think that there was anything special about this Mongolian cavalry. He had seen many such opponents, and the strongest was the Walla cavalry led by Yeshen. But what was the result? Didn't they still lose at his hands? They had once looked down on the 5-star army, but reality would give them a slap in the face. He also did not think that this Mongolian cavalry was that strong. Young Master. Young Heir, who had been following Wang Chong from the side, had an excited expression on his face. It was rare for him to encounter an opponent who did not run away. Although there were only 300 of them, they had successfully aroused Young Heir's fighting spirit. I'll give you 100 long way. Go. Yang Chendong said casually, as if he was talking about something very normal. The black cavalry moved out. Under Beta Persei's lead and Ba Daozhang's support, a group of 102 cavalry jumped over the Amerga River and headed straight for their target. Nicholas and the other 4 also wanted to urge their horses forward, but they were stopped by Cho Wu, who was standing at the side. This made the 5 of them puzzled. Did they not need to fight? After Yang Chendong took out a large amount of salt and iron to give to his tribe, Nicholas and the other 4 had already sold their lives to the 5-star army. They were even prepared to be members of the 5-star army. This was the rule. After receiving benefits from others, they naturally had to work for them. Chapter 1374. The 5 of them were even prepared to die in battle. However, when Chiovi stopped them, the 5 of them realized that the 5-star army was different from other armies. They did not need them to risk their lives. Could it be that they were really helping their tribe for free? The other 4 people were led by Nikolaev. After being stopped, their gazes naturally fell on him. Let's wait and see. Nikolaev, who was also at a loss, could only say this. At the same time, he looked at the battlefield. He could not understand why the 5-star army only sent out 100 cavalry, even though they had more people. What was the reason for this? Very quickly, Nikolaev had an answer. Everything that happened on the battlefield told him that there was only one reason why the 5-star army only sent out 100 cavalry. These Mongol cavalry were not worth sending out more cavalry. The black cavalry leaped over the river, and the distance between the 2 sides was getting closer and closer. When they were less than 4 li away, Ahuchi shouted, 100 cavalry on each side, charge! Ahuchi thought that he had seen through the situation, and that the enemy had sent out 100 cavalry to test the waters. This was his chance. He only needed to kill these 100 cavalry as quickly as possible, and take advantage of the fact that the enemy had not reacted to the situation to kill them. Then the situation would be settled. When he thought about how the enemy's black armor would increase his army's combat strength by at least 50%, he began to laugh maniacally. It was truly a blessing from the gods that such a good preparation was placed in front of him. There was no reason for him not to accept it. On the battlefield, the 200 Mongol cavalry shouted and made all sorts of noises. They spread out and surrounded the 100 black cavalry. Although there were only 200 of them, because their formation was too spread out, it actually gave off a strong momentum. They either went towards the left wing or the right wing. Some even went towards the middle. The sabers in their hands continuously spun as they prepared to strike. On the other hand, the 100 black cavalry soldiers also spread out. With Beta Persei, Ba Daozhang, Pengyu, and the others at the tip of the arrows, they formed groups of around a dozen people, and they tore through the air like arrows that left their bows. They headed straight for Ahuchi, who was protected by 100 Mongolian cavaliers. It was as if no matter where the wind blew, he would just go all the way. Fire! Fire! Ahuchi's face revealed a trace of panic when he saw that the incoming enemy did not care about being surrounded, and instead went straight for the root of the problem. Although there were only 100 of them, for some reason, they gave him a great sense of pressure. It was like being stared at by a wild beast on a grassland. With a command, the 100 cavalrymen beside him quickly took out their strong bows, knocked their arrows, and began to shoot. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Arrows pierced through the air unceasingly, their target being the 100 black cavalry soldiers who were charging straight at them. At the same time, a large number of Mongolian cavaliers also surged in from the left and right of the black cavalry. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was an ambush from all sides. At that moment, the black cavalry had already met with dozens of Mongolian cavaliers in front of them. Their black clothes and black armor allowed them to ignore normal arrows. At that moment, they only needed to swing their swords and kill the enemies who were charging at them. Clang clang clang. The Black Knight Dragon Guards did not show any signs of slowing down, nor did they make any movements to dodge. They allowed the arrows to hit their bodies, and the sound of metal clashing could be heard. Then, the sabers in their hands clashed with the sabers of the Mongolian cavalry in front of them. Then an unbelievable scene appeared. The Mongolian cavaliers who were riding on their horses with ferocious expressions were stunned on the spot. It was as if their acupoints had been sealed. They did not move at all, and allowed the black cavalry soldiers beside them to jump past them, as if they did not know what was going on. This scene shocked Nikolaev, who was watching the battle. This scene shocked Ahuchi, who was commanding the battle. This scene shocked the Mongolian cavaliers who were flanking them from the left and right. A scene that should not have happened on the battlefield happened just like that. But everyone knew that swords and sabers had no eyes on the battlefield. Often, the outcome of a battle could be decided in an instant. There was absolutely no room for the slightest bit of absent-mindedness or carelessness, because it often meant that one was already walking together with the god of death. But now it was not just one Mongolian cavalier, but dozens of Mongolian cavaliers who were standing there. It was as if a spell had been cast on them, and they did not move at all. This scene was so real that it caused everyone who saw it to have a big question in their hearts. They could not help but ask in their hearts, "What is going on? What is going on now?" While most people were still confused, Beta Persei led the black cavalry, and did not stop charging forward. They continued to charge forward bravely, and soon, they reached Ahuchi's camp and stood in front of the Mongolian general. Kill. Ahuchi was also puzzled as to why his cavaliers did not move. However, with the enemy before them, he could not care so much. He clamped his legs on his horse and rode forward with his saber raised. Dang dang dang. When the two sides came into contact, they exchanged 3 saber blows in an extremely short period of time. Only the most elite cavaliers could achieve such a speed. Only the veterans who were one with their horses could do it so skillfully. The black cavalry slashed 3 times in a short period of time. Ahuchi and the others who were passively defending also blocked 3 saber blows. A huge force traveled down the saber to their arms, causing the arms of the 100 Mongolian cavaliers to tremble uncontrollably. Shock rose in their hearts. Not only was the speed of their opponent's saber extremely fast, the strength was also extraordinary. He was definitely a tough opponent. Before the shock in their hearts could completely disappear, an even more shocking scene appeared. After blocking the 3 slashes, they were shocked to find that the sabers in their hands had actually broken into 2. This sudden scene shocked everyone, causing them to be at a loss for what to do. They were completely shocked, just like the dozens of Mongolian riders earlier. Their minds were blank as they sat on their horses, forgetting everything. How could they have known that the Black Cavalry Dragon Guards had already changed their weapons to divine sabers? This was something that Yang Chendong had specially brought out from the military factory in Crimson City. As Yang Xie gained more and more iron ore, his forging skills continued to improve. The quality of the sabers also increased greatly. Every new divine saber lived up to its name. Not only were the sabers thinner and lighter than normal sabers, they were also sharper and had reached a state where they could cut through iron like mud. In just 3 saber blows, they were able to cut the enemy's saber in half. This showed how powerful and tough the saber was. Get down from your horses. Beta Persei and the others, who had succeeded in one strike, reined in their horses. Then, they swung their arms and used the backs of their sabers to smack down on the backs of the Mongolian cavaliers who were still standing on their horses with shocked expressions. Under the powerful force, the Mongolian cavaliers who were unable to defend themselves in time fell down from their horses like dumplings. 100 Mongolian cavaliers, including a Wuxia, were all captured at the start of the fight. This sudden scene also shocked the Mongolian cavaliers who were charging over from both sides. In their eyes, a Wuxia and the others were captured the moment they came into contact with the black cavalry. How did this trick work? They really could not understand it. It was only when the dozens of Mongolian cavaliers who were fighting against the Black Knights and Dragon Guards on the battlefield suddenly shouted and ran in all directions with their broken sabers in hand that the other Mongolian cavaliers noticed that the weapons in their comrades' hands had been broken into 2 at some point in time. They finally figured out what had happened and why their general had been taken captive in a single encounter. The remaining 100 or so Mongolian cavaliers suddenly changed their direction of charge. They no longer fought against the black cavalry. Instead, they ran in all directions. A group of cavaliers dressed in black armor and equipped with spirit. They could ignore the arrows fired from afar, and also had sabers that could cut through iron like mud. This kind of opponent was not someone they could fight against. Since they could not win, they could only run. They had to report this news to the Khan. Not good, they want to run. Nikolaev instinctively shouted and immediately rode out. The scene that had just happened in front of him had stimulated him greatly. In their eyes, they were invincible and there was nothing they could not win. Wherever they appeared, it was as if a gust of wind had swept through and not a single blade of grass grew. Once any of the Russian tribes met them, they would usually run away before the battle even started. Yet it was precisely such a powerful existence that was unable to withstand a single blow from the Black Knight Dragon Guards. In just a single exchange, the Black Knight Dragon Guards were defeated. This was simply too unbelievable and unbelievable. After the shock, Nikolaev's eyes were filled with killing intent. The Mongolian cavaliers were defeated. Was this not the time for him to collect the blood debt? He thought about how his tribe originally had more than 1,000 people, but after being attacked by the Mongolian cavaliers time and time again, there were only a few hundred people left. How great was this hatred? Even in his dreams, he wanted to take revenge. He could only hate the fact that his strength was limited. Now that the opportunity had finally appeared, how could he let go of this chance to beat the dog in the water? Nikolaev wanted to chase after the enemy, and the 4 companions beside him did the same. However, before they could truly run out, arrows tore through the air and landed on the Mongolian cavalrymen who were trying to escape one after another or on their warhorses. Tian, who appeared with 1,000 cavaliers. They had been lying in ambush for a long time in order to surround the enemy and not give anyone a chance to escape. Chapter 1375. Tian, who was very confident in the black cavalry, had been waiting for the moment when they would be defeated and run away. When the opportunity came, he gave the order and the 1,000 cavalrymen under him raised their bows and shot. One after another, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell from their horses and fell to the ground. They fell so hard that they saw stars and lost their sense of direction. Rows of cavalry moved out in an orderly formation from all directions, forming a huge circle that surrounded the 300 Mongolian cavalrymen. It also made some of the Mongolian cavalrymen, who had just climbed up from the ground and wanted to escape despair. Capture them all, kill those who resist. After Tian, who was wearing a purple cape, gave the order, the elite cavalrymen under him quickly went forward and restrained the Mongolian cavalrymen, who fell to the ground one after another. After 3 Mongolian cavalrymen who wanted to resist with their blades were beheaded and blood splattered 3 feet high, the other Mongolian cavalrymen became obedient. At this moment, all of them had despair in their eyes, and they looked like the commoners who had been surrounded and killed by them. From the beginning to the end of the battle, less than 15 minutes had passed and Beta Persei had already returned to Yangqindong. Reporting to young master, in this battle, we killed 12 of the enemy and captured 288 of them. There were no casualties on our side. Please give us your orders. Clean up the battlefield and interrogate the prisoners. Yangqindong's magnetic voice rang out. After Beta Persei gave a military salute, he handed everything to Commander Tian Hu to deal with. Tian Hu, who had been through hundreds of battles, was very familiar with these matters. He quickly came to Aheki and asked about whether there were any more Mongolian cavalrymen nearby. Aheki, who had been beaten silly, had 2 of his fingers mercilessly chopped off by Tian Hu. He screamed and said loudly, I'll talk. In less than 10 minutes, Aheki told him that there was another group of Mongol cavalry 100 miles away beside the Lena River. The 6th young master, he told me that there is a group of 2,000 Mongolian cavalry near the Lena River in the northeast. Their mission is to monitor this area and prevent the Far Eastern Army from breaking out. Tian Hu reported as he walked in front of Yangqindong. 2,000 cavalrymen? Yangqindong sneered. Let's go and devour them. Anyone who dared to challenge the 5-star army was an enemy. Yangqindong would never show mercy to his enemies, not to mention an army of foreign races. Although there were only 1,500 of them, none of them showed fear when Yangqindong gave the order. From their point of view, it was as if their 1,500 men encircling and eating the 2,000 Mongol cavalry was a matter of course. It was so normal. He left behind a small group of 50 men to watch over Aheki and the other 2 captives. In the blink of an eye, Yangqindong brought the main force and disappeared from the Amuga River. Lena River. The river was flowing from a high point to a low point. Beside this 30 feet wide river, a number of tents had been set up. Many Mongolian soldiers patrolled with their sabers in hand. Piles of firewood were piled up here, and many fully dressed sheep were placed on the piles of firewood. What a lively scene. The sky was about to turn dark, and bonfires were lit. From the tents at the side, many white-skinned women in tattered clothes walked out. Under the illumination of the fire, everyone's face revealed a terrified expression. These women were all captives of the Mongolian cavalrymen, and they were all women from the nearby Russian tribes. Over the past few days, the Mongol cavalry had appeared like locusts and invaded their homes. They killed all the men in their tribe and captured them. Some of them had lost their fathers, some had lost their husbands, and some had lost their children. Their experiences had caused some of them to feel numb. If not for the fact that they did not have the courage to die, they would have followed in the footsteps of their families. However, although they did not die, they only had a body. Without a soul, without hope, they were just walking corpses. Bring them out and let them dance. If they dance well, they will have food to eat, ha ha ha. A middle-aged man dressed in Mongolian armor laughed out loud. He was the general of the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers, Nanlidi. Ever since he had followed Hulihan from Siberia to the Far East region, he had been living a blissful life every day. In the day, he would lead the cavalrymen to sweep and kill, and at night, he would enjoy the fruits of his labor. Under his small eyes, his gaze carefully swept across the white women. He had already chosen 2 targets who would serve him to sleep tonight. Compared to the life in the Far East region, it was much better than the barren Siberia. There was good wine, beauties, and a Han Chinese army that could be taken as prey at any time. Compared to the Siberia region that they had swept through countless times, this place was simply too rich. Of course, what Nanlidi enjoyed was still a far cry from what Khan Hurihan and General Akmu enjoyed. The other party had taken over the Far Eastern region's capital, Al City. There were hundreds of thousands of people from various races there, and the wealth and beauties were uncountable. Although he was envious in his heart, Nanlidi could only sigh. He knew that his experience was still shallow, and some good things would not be his turn. However, it was not that he did not have any hope. For example, if he could find the hiding place of the Far Eastern Army, it would be a great achievement. It was said that the Far East Army's provisions were hidden in a very secretive place, and only the governor knew where it was. Once he found this person, the merit he would receive would be enough to qualify him to go to All City. At that time, his treatment would undergo an earth-shattering change. Tomorrow we will send people to search nearby and expand the search area. However, for now, of course we have to enjoy it. Haha, come on, let them dance. Nanlidi, who was full of expectations for tomorrow, seemed to be filled with yearning and hope. His entire mood seemed to have become even more excited at this moment. The general gave the order, and the women who were chased out of the house were thrown into the inner circle, and under the light of the bonfire, they started to dance the Russian folk dance. Outside, countless Mongolian cavalrymen drank the horse milk wine, ate the whole roasted lamb, and laughed with saliva dripping from their mouths. Some of their gazes were filled with lust when they looked at the scene, as if they were evil children on the grasslands staring at white lambs. The women felt their hearts palpitating, and some of the more timid ones started to cry. They could already imagine what kind of fate would befall them when night fell. Thinking about how they would soon become the bedding of these evil wolf-like people, some of them could not help but start to sob. Everyone would be afraid, and now, the Russian women were not only afraid, they had already started to feel fear. This caused their dance to become messy, and it immediately attracted the scolding of some of the Mongolian soldiers. The more nervous one was, the easier it was for them to make mistakes. Finally, one of the girls lost her composure. Especially when she was too direct with the gaze of a Mongolian soldier. She accidentally sprained her ankle and fell to the ground. Bastard, you can't even dance properly. What's the use of having you? One of the closest Mongolian soldiers pulled out the scimitar at his waist and walked towards the woman with a ferocious gaze. His body was filled with killing intent, and his gaze was filled with rage. He wanted to kill one as an example, and let all the Russian women know that in front of the brave Mongolian soldiers, they could only listen obediently. Otherwise, only death would await them. The Mongolian soldier stood up, and the Russian women cried out in shock. They hugged each other, but they threw the woman on the ground to the side. In times of danger, the selfish side of humans was fully displayed. Although they were all prey, no one had any intention of standing up for the woman. It was better to live than to die. And this was a truth that could be easily displayed in many ways. All of the girls were trembling in fear, causing the other Mongol soldiers to laugh out loud. They loved to see their prey in fear, and it was as if that was the only way to show off their strength. The Mongolian soldier who stood up had already pulled out the scimitar on his body, and in a few steps, he arrived in front of the Russian woman on the ground. What he saw was a pleading, pitiful, and helpless gaze. However, at this moment, it was as if he did not see it. In these few days, he had already killed 2 Russians, and he was no longer afraid of killing. On the contrary, he could even feel a trace of pleasure from it. Sometimes, killing could be addictive, especially when the prey did not dare to resist, and was at his mercy. That kind of feeling was indescribably wonderful. The Mongolian soldier raised the scimitar in his hand, and his face was filled with smiles. Then he swung the scimitar down, and he could not wait to see the woman covered in blood and struggling on the ground. The other Mongolian soldiers did not move, and it was as if they were already used to this scene. They were still waiting for the scimitar to fall, and as long as this woman died, the other Russian women would definitely be more obedient. Later on, wouldn't they be able to do whatever they wanted, and they would be at their mercy? Unknowingly, everyone's gaze landed on the Mongolian soldier, and they were waiting for what was about to happen. However, 1 breath passed, 2 breaths passed, and that scimitar did not fall. It wasn't until 3 breaths later that someone suddenly shouted, "Where did the bow and arrow come from?" Not good, enemy attack. Under the illumination of the bonfire, an arrow with a trembling tail appeared on the back of the Mongolian soldier. At this moment, a quarter of the arrow had already entered. Previously, because of the angle, no one noticed it, but now that they saw it clearly, some of the experienced soldiers began to shout. Chapter 1376. It was also with this shout that the ground rumbled. It was as if a million drums were beating in the hearts of those who heard it, causing many people to be surprised at the first moment. Any veteran who had been on the battlefield could tell that this was the sound of horses galloping on the ground. From the sound of it, there should be a large number of cavalrymen. "Get on your horses," Pick up your weapons and follow this general to kill. Nanlidi also threw the wineskin in his hand to the ground at the first moment, and then he started to make a fuss. He had not heard that the Khan was going to send troops to help him. Furthermore, one of his brothers had already been shot by an arrow. Even if he used his toes to think, he should know that the enemy was not a friend. However, he did not panic. The only enemies in the vicinity were a few scattered Russian tribes. They were few in number, and did not have enough horses and weapons. They were not a threat to them. As long as they could withstand the initial attack, it would be time for them to counterattack. As expected of well-trained elite soldiers, under the command of their general, the drunken Mongolian soldiers seemed to have changed. They were all in high spirits as they found their horses and pulled out their scimitars. They looked as if they were ready to enter the battlefield at any time. Rumble, rumble, the sound got closer and closer. Following that, a group of cavalrymen in black clothes and black armor charged towards the Mongolian camp under the protection of another group of cavalrymen in green military uniforms. While they were still far away, the arrows in their hands were fired from afar. When the arrows landed on the tents, they caused a raging fire. The newcomers were the 200 black cavalry led by Ba Daojiang, the vice-captain of the 1st Battalion of Black Cavalry Dragon Guards, as well as the 600 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Army led by Tian Hu. During the day, the Black Cavalry had been in the limelight by the Amerga River. At night, Tian Hu did not want to be a spectator. He took the initiative to ask for battle, and Yang Chendong allowed him to bring 600 soldiers. As for the other Black Cavalry and the 1st Cavalry Army, they surrounded the perimeter to prevent the enemy from escaping. Before Yang Chendong found the enemy's main force, he did not want his whereabouts to be known by others. When Tian Hu and Ba Daojiang appeared, it was as if a dark cloud had gathered. With the best weapons, the strongest horses, and the strongest physique, the 5-star army charged into the Mongolian camp as soon as they appeared, showing their tyrannical and domineering side. Without any time to prepare, there was no way to counterattack. The 5-star army arrived in front of them. The lit tents and the bonfires on the ground became the guiding lights, illuminating the surroundings and giving the 5-star army directions, allowing them to kill in all directions. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers who had yet to find their horses were hacked to the ground. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to counterattack realized that the scimitars in their hands were quickly broken into two, becoming useless objects. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers fell to the ground covered in blood, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. One after another, the Mongolian soldiers watched as the enemy's scimitars slit their necks. They were powerless and helpless. It was as if they had been surrounded by the small Russian tribe. Now they had become the prey, the meat on the fish. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. Those who surrender, throw down your weapons and kneel on the ground, and you will live. Tian Hu held his scimitars, and in a short period of time, he had already cut down 3 Mongolian soldiers. He was filled with killing intent as he watched the Mongolian soldiers in front of him dwindle. Those who surrender will live. Those who resist will die. More and more 5-star army soldiers began to roar. Their voices were transmitted into the ears of the Mongolian soldiers. Some of the Mongolian soldiers who had been frightened pale by the scene in front of them finally put down their weapons. This was simply an unequal battle. One side came prepared, while the other side came unprepared. One side was preparing their troops, while the other side was immersed in wine and women. One side was filled with killing intent, while the other side was filled with fear. One side was like a hot knife through butter, while the other side was defeated like a mountain. Under such a situation, if they continued to resist, they would only die. Just like those Russian girls who knew that it was hard to live, but did not want to die, these Mongolian soldiers were the same. After knowing that they could live if they surrendered, they did not hesitate to choose the latter. With a large number of Mongolian soldiers kneeling and surrendering, the situation on the battlefield became clearer. In less than an hour, the entire battle had ended. Ba Daojiang and Tian Hu began to clean up the battlefield. The Russian girls who had been captured stood together, the Mongolian soldiers who had surrendered squatted together, and the corpses of the Mongolian soldiers who had been killed were carried together. Under the illumination of the flames, The Russian girls looked at their surroundings in panic. To them, the Mongolian soldiers had been defeated, but it did not mean that they were free. No one knew who these Mongolian soldiers were, and whether they had any other intentions. If one were to use a phrase to describe their mentality, it would be that they had just escaped from the wolf's den and entered the tiger's den. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The earth trembled once again, causing the Russian girls, who were already worried about their future, to have a drastic change in expression. Could it be that another cavalry was coming? If that was the case, would they be able to survive the battle? On the other hand, the Mongolian soldiers who had dropped their weapons on the ground were pleasantly surprised. More Mongolian soldiers? Could it be their own people? If that was the case, wouldn't they have a chance to retaliate? Some of the smarter ones could not help but raise their heads and look around. Pucci, with a slash of the saber, a head that was still moving around quickly flew into the air. When the head was separated from the body, blood spurted out and sprayed on the bodies of the surrendered Mongolian soldiers, causing them to tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, they finally realized how ruthless their opponents were. They were even more ruthless than they were. Compared to them who killed without batting an eyelid, these Mongolian soldiers were the demon kings. Don't have any dirty thoughts. Act like you are surrendering. When Ba Daojiang's loud voice rang out, he was wiping the saber in his hand. With such an example, the rest of the Mongol soldiers quickly became obedient. Now, even if the battle cries outside shook the heavens, they did not have the courage to raise their heads. After a series of rumbling sounds, another group of Mongolian soldiers entered the battlefield. Yang Chendong, who was dressed in a golden battle robe, entered the battlefield under the protection of the Black Cavalry and the soldiers of the First Army. Behind them, hundreds of men dressed as Mongolian soldiers were hugging their heads as they walked. Among them was the general of this group of Mongolian soldiers, Nanlidi. When the battle started, the situation was one-sided. When Nanlidi saw that the enemy was not friendly and that they were strong, the first thing he did was not to lead his soldiers to retaliate. Instead, he led the hundreds of elites to escape. At any time, survival was always the most important thing. Nanlidi was thinking that as long as he could escape, he would go to All City to seek an audience with the Great Khan and ask for more reinforcements to completely eliminate this unknown enemy. With the thought of revenge in mind, Nanlidi decided to endure for now. However, not long after he left the tent, he met Yang Chendong who had been waiting for him. With an order, the arrow shot out, causing him to feel dizzy. After another wave of cavalry charge, the Mongol soldiers who were already scared out of their wits all laid down their weapons and surrendered. Nanlidi was forced to join them as well. However, even at this time, Nanlidi still had a sliver of hope in his heart. He thought that this unknown enemy should not recognize him. As long as he did not make a sound and did not reveal his identity, there was a chance that the other soldiers would mix together and find an opportunity to retaliate. Nanlidi, who always had his own thoughts, quickly found that his hopes were dashed once again. This was all because he saw someone. A centurion under his command, a Heki, was holding a torch and identifying the captives. In a short period of time, a number of centurions had been identified. This scene caused Nanlidi to lower his head involuntarily. Unfortunately, a Heki quickly appeared in front of him and ordered him to raise his head. Nanlidi had no choice but to raise his head with a ferocious gaze. He wanted to warn a Heki not to spout nonsense, but just as he raised his head, a palm landed on his face. At this time, General Nantai still wants to threaten me? Needless to say, this slap was from a Heki. He was using the power of the 5-star army to vent his anger. If it was not for this person pushing him aside, he would not have led his troops to guard the perimeter, and would not have been captured by the 5-star army so quickly. Of course, he was also using this opportunity to express his loyalty to the 5-star army. After witnessing the strength of the 5-star army, he had already given up on resisting. In his eyes, the most important thing was to survive. Nanlidi, who was slapped, was furious. As a Mongolian warrior, he cared a lot about his face. As the saying goes, when you hit someone, don't hit their face. Now that his face had been slapped, he only wanted to fight to the death with a Heki. However, he had only taken a step forward when he was met with a flurry of punches and kicks from the two 5-star army soldiers standing beside a Heki. After who knew how many kicks, Nanlidi finally became obedient. Lying on the ground, he felt that lying on the ground was a very comfortable thing. He is the commander of the troops, General Nanlidi. I will have to trouble the two of you to bring him over. Unlike facing Nanlidi, a Heki had a flattering expression. Under the drag of the two 5-star army soldiers, Nanlidi was thrown in front of Yang Chendong, who was already sitting under the golden blade. Just as he was about to lie on the ground and play dead, a clear voice entered his ears. If you don't want to die, kneel properly. Chapter 1377. With the scene of him killing the surrendered Mongol soldiers, Nanlidi immediately knelt down and did not even waste a breath of time. The soft feared the hard feared the rash, and the rash feared those who did not care about their lives. The facts proved that the ancients did not lie. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry were either killed or surrendered. After the matter was tallied, not a single one of them managed to escape. This was because Nanlidi was too careless and did not even send out a single scout. Maybe he thought that he was the king in this world and no one dared to offend him. None of the 2,000 Mongol cavalry managed to escape, and none of the Russian girls managed to escape. The tallied result was that there were close to 400 of them. Among them, there were many women who were close to 50 years old. From this, one could see that the Mongol cavalry were a bunch of country bumpkins who wanted anyone. Along with Yang Chendong's arrival, these Russian girls were naturally released and Nikolaev personally talked to them. Based on Yang Chendong's instructions, if they could find their own tribe, they would be given food and allowed to leave. They would also take the chance to spread the news of the 5-star army's arrival, and some policies that would benefit the people. On the other hand, if they had no home to return to, they could follow the 5-star army to All City, which was where the far eastern province was. When they reached there, whether they remarried or started their own tribe, as long as they were willing to work hard for the 5-star army, they would not starve to death. On the contrary, those who worked hard would change and live a better life. At this moment, Nikolaev was filled with absolute respect for Yang Chendong. He personally saw 1,500 5-star army soldiers deal with 2,000 Mongol cavalry, like they were chopping vegetables. At this moment, he already had the thought of joining the 5-star army. He placed a lot of importance on the mission that Yang Chendong gave him, and wanted to complete it well. They did not rest for the entire night. And Nikolai brought his 4 brothers to talk to almost all the Russian women. After confirming that more than 30 of them could find their own tribe, they gave them food and allowed them to leave. There were still around 350 Russian women left in the camp, and they would be sent along with the 2,000 Mongol cavalrymen who were captured and sent to the city of Arr. The only difference was that these women were considered good citizens while these Mongol captives had to do manual labor. In the future, they would have to repair the city walls and roads. The next morning, Yang Chendong first listened to Nicholas' report. After knowing that Nicholas had completed the task well, he gave him some encouragement. Then he saw Nanlidi, who had become very obedient after being tortured for a night. Bugnam of Gojoseon, this sinner is willing to take my place. Please don't kill me, don't kill me. A night of torture made Nanlidi understand what was worse than death. At this moment, he did not dare to think about what happened last night. He only wanted to live, even if he had to sacrifice his dignity. Very good. Then immediately follow your agreement, and report the appearance of the 5-star army's reinforcements at the Amerga River. Remember, no matter what method you use, as long as you can lure the main force of your cavalry over, it will be a great achievement. Otherwise, if you can't complete this task, you can prepare to die. No, it will be worse than death. Yang Chendong didn't look at Nanlidi. He didn't have a good impression of such a spineless general. If it wasn't for the fact that he still needed this person, he would have already ordered people to drag him out and behead him. Yang Chendong gave him a chance, and Nanlidi readily agreed. He knew that whether he lived or died, or lived a life worse than death, would depend on the completion of this task. How could he dare to be careless? After he left the tent, he took the initiative to look for a Heki. The 5-star army would not allow him to leave. Some things could only be done by someone trusted by the Khan. Yang Chendong did not care about what Nanlidi was going to do. He brought the army and retreated towards the Amerga River. When he came, he had already observed that the terrain was very suitable for a large army to fight. He had to set up a trap in advance and wait for the enemy to take the bait. Archung, the place where the capital of the eastern state was located. At this moment, the largest mansion had already become the residence of Abelia Khan Hurihin. It had been more than 3 months since they occupied Archung. This was also the most comfortable winter that Hurihin had ever experienced. In the past, when he was in the Abelia region, when winter came it would feel like a year. Everywhere was white snow. In some places where there was no wind, the snow was almost 10 feet deep. Even if the cavalry fell into the snow, they would quickly disappear without a trace. In such an environment, no work could be done. Everyone could only stay in their yurts to hide. This was also known as the winter cat. Even if Hurihin was the Khan, it was the same. The only difference was that the yurt he stayed in was bigger. However, this year's winter was completely different. In the far eastern state, although the snow was still falling and the weather was still cold, there were wide streets and hundreds of thousands of people of various races. There were also many goods and food that could not be found in the Abradia region. This place was like a big treasure trove. Hurihin and his soldiers were dazzled. Then came a round of looting. Whether it was food, goods, houses, money, or women, they all became the targets of their looting. In order to prevent the people in the city from escaping, Hurihin had also ordered the 4 cities to be sealed off. Without his permission, no one was allowed to leave this place. This made Dal City seem like a large sheep pen, where hundreds of thousands of people were kept as their prey. Hurihin, who had never been so rich, could finally eat his fill. He could wear clean and warm cotton-padded clothes. Every night, when he slept, a different woman would warm his bed. Those days were so beautiful that he would not want to change them even if he was given a fairy's body. After 3 months of such drunken stupor, Hurihin had put on a lot of weight. Not only him, but the cavalry under his command had also become much stronger. After getting used to living a good life, he was afraid that he would go back and live a poor life. So he was troubled. Where was the food in the eastern state? This became a sore point for Hurihin. According to Tang Sheng, who had surrendered, there was a batch of relief food in the far eastern region. It was to prevent natural disasters from happening. There were about 1 million don of food. If it was only for the 30,000 cavalrymen, it could last them for 10 to 20 years. If they could find this food, wouldn't it mean that they would not have to worry about food for the next 20 years? When he heard this news, one could imagine how excited Hurihin was. But the only fly in the ointment was that other than Governor Chenbo, no one knew where the food was hidden. Hurihin did not believe it and ordered his general, Akmu, to lead his men to search all over the city. Some places were even dug up, but they did not find anything. Seeing that the food in the city was getting lesser and lesser, and if this went on, they would have to rob the people of their food, Hurihin began to panic and had no choice but to increase the search for Chenbo. But Chenbo seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Not only that, but the other 3 division commanders of the Far Eastern Army had also disappeared. Hurihin did not believe that Chenbo would leave just like that. According to Tang Sheng, he had injured the governor back then, so he would not be able to escape far with his injuries. Moreover, the eastern state was the result of years of hard work by the governor. He would not give up so easily. Find him. If he is alive, I want to see his corpse. Hurihin called General Akmu, the surrendered general, Tang Sheng, and the Russian merchant Belinsky, who had provided him with important information. In front of them, he slammed his fist on the table and said sternly, "General Tang, has there been any news from the other spies you arranged in the Far Eastern Army?" The furious Hurihin first looked at Tang Sheng and asked, "No." Tang Sheng shook his head. He didn't understand why none of the spies in the army had sent him any news. Could it be that they had been found? That was impossible. How long had it been? Tang Sheng was puzzled. But Supreme General Akmu didn't care that much. Seeing that the Great Khan was angry, and that he wanted to see the corpse, he naturally agreed. He also said that he would immediately send out more scouts and expand the search area to find the remnants of the Far Eastern province. As a surrendered general, Tang Sheng, who had nowhere else to go, also said that he would fully cooperate with General Akmu and search for Chen Bo's possible hiding places to prevent any loopholes. Both of the generals had expressed their stance, which made Hulihan reveal a satisfied expression. Then his gaze fell on the merchant Belinsky, wanting to see what he had to say. The real reason why Hulihan was able to conquer the Far Eastern state was because of this Belinsky. Belinsky grew up in a white family. Because of his parents' low status, he had never eaten a proper meal before he grew up. At that time, he had vowed that he would change everything through his own efforts. In the future, his children would not have to worry about food anymore. It was said that the children of the poor were able to take charge of the family at an early age. After Belinsky had his ambition, he worked hard for it. Coupled with his talent, he slowly became a true merchant. In order to obtain more benefits, he traveled extensively and was not afraid of danger. One time, he accidentally came to the Far Eastern prefecture and saw a huge city standing there. At that time, regardless of whether it was Siberia or the Far Eastern region, they were all undeveloped and deserted. Other than the few cities where the Khans were located, one could occasionally see a tribe of 1,000 people. Those could be considered prosperous. However, there were hundreds of thousands of people from various races in Dal City. This shocked Belinsky and made him very excited. Merchants knew that as long as there were people, they could do business. These hundreds of thousands of people were equivalent to hundreds of thousands of customers, which meant that they could earn an uncountable amount of money. Chapter 1378. In his excitement, Belinsky used his business methods to understand the situation in the city, as well as the prices of the various items in the city. As his understanding of the city deepened, he was also deeply shocked by the dazzling array of goods in the city. For example, glass products, perfume, silk, tea leaves, and so on were all used here. Once these things were sold elsewhere, the benefits would be unimaginable. In his excitement, Belinsky took out all of his savings to purchase goods in all city. Gradually, he established a relationship with Tang Sheng. Under his intentional roping, the two of them quickly became friends, and he was also able to learn some secrets that no one else knew. For example, if a Han merchant were to purchase goods from Arching, the costs would be reduced by a lot, and they would receive a lot of preferential treatment. For example, Tang Sheng actually had Mongolian blood in him, and his tribe was in the Abelia region, etc. Belinsky had always been an ambitious businessman. After learning about the situation, he had other ideas. For example, he could drive the Han people out of the Far Eastern region and let him personally control everything. That way, his strength would increase by hundreds or even thousands of times in the shortest amount of time. At that time, he would no longer need to run around doing business. At that time, his descendants would no longer have to worry about not having enough to eat. After the ambitious Belinsky left the Far Eastern region, he came to the Siberia region to look for Khan Hurihin. If he wanted to achieve his goal, he needed a powerful partner, and Hurihin was that person in his heart. Hurihin, who was also ambitious, quickly got together with Belinsky. Then, they took control of Tang Sheng's tribe and used him as a spy to launch a surprise attack. Without any preparation, Chen Bo was injured and fled, and the Far Eastern region changed hands. In fact, Hurihin was able to live a good life now because of the information and help provided by Belinsky. Therefore, in his heart, he still valued this merchant very much. Now he looked at him and wanted to hear if he had any good opinions. This did not disappoint Hurihin. From the perspective of a merchant, Belinsky made a suggestion. Open the city gates and let the commoners out. At the same time, offer a large reward for information on Chen Bo's whereabouts. No matter who it was, what tribe they were from, or what status they had in the past, as long as they could provide information on Chen Bo's whereabouts, they would be rewarded with 50,000 taels of silver. If you can capture him alive and deliver him to me, you will be rewarded with 100,000 taels of silver. Whether it was 50,000 or 100,000, it was not a small number. If they hadn't conquered Arching, even if they sold Hurihin, they wouldn't have been able to gather so much money. But now he had already occupied the far eastern state. He had plundered a lot of good things here, but he didn't have time to take away the silver. These mere tens of thousands of silver taels were nothing in his eyes. Great Khan, everyone has a greedy heart. As long as we offer a large enough reward, no one will not be tempted. Once the news spreads, we don't have to worry about Chenbo not showing up, Belinsky said confidently. This came from his understanding of human nature. In this world, no one didn't like money. All they had to do was provide information, and they could get 50,000 taels of silver. They wouldn't be able to finish eating and drinking for the rest of their lives. Who wouldn't be tempted? The so-called loyalty was only because the bargaining chip for betrayal wasn't enough. Now that Belinsky had raised this bargaining chip, and was satisfied, anyone with a weak will would know what decision to make. Good, very good. Hu Lihan was overjoyed when he heard that. He just wanted to find Chenbo and use him to find the 1,000,000 dan of grain. He didn't care about the process. A huge net was set up to find Chenbo. At this time, Chenbo didn't know that someone had put a bounty on his head. He didn't even know that Yang Chendong had led the army into the Far East. At this time, he was suffering from a fever in a forest 50 miles east of Arching, enduring a life-and-death crisis. It's still not working. He's still burning, the captain of the guard, Xia Qian, said worriedly after removing his hand from Chenbo's forehead. If it doesn't work, then boil some water. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Kong He, clenched and unclenched his right fist. He seemed to have made a decision. Tang Sheng's sudden attack had caught Chenbo off guard. He had been stabbed while running away. Fortunately, the Far Eastern Army had a complete set of traditional Chinese medicine, so a knife wound wasn't fatal. However, Chenbo hadn't had a good rest. His wound had become infected while he was running, causing him to have a high fever. Although the wound was no longer inflamed, if the fever didn't subside, his life would still be in danger. Scalding one's feet with hot water was a good way to get rid of the fever. Everyone who studied under Yang Shui knew this. However, the problem was that they were in a state of hibernation. They couldn't boil water and smoke to attract attention. If Chenbo woke up, he would never allow such a thing to happen. However, this was a matter of life and death. When Chenbo wasn't awake, Commander Kong He took his position and gave this order. Okay, let's be careful. The captain of the guards, Xia Qian, nodded and ordered someone to make the arrangements. He himself didn't leave Chenbo's side at all times. He even had a short knife with him. Following Tang Sheng's rebellion, it was hard for Xia Qian to trust anyone. Speaking of which, it was precisely because of Tang Sheng's rebellion that Chenbo became vigilant. He firmly grasped the military power in his hands and gave the order when he was running away. Without his military order and tiger tally, even the 3 commanders couldn't mobilize the soldiers of the Far Eastern Army. As a result, the counterattack couldn't be carried out, and the 3 divisions could only find a place to hide. If he wanted to turn the situation around, the first thing he had to do was to wake Chenbo up. In order to achieve this goal, Xia Qian didn't care whether he would be discovered or not. Since no matter what he did, it would be contradictory. He would just choose the lesser of 2 evils. They naturally didn't lack firewood in the mountains. The only problem was that once they did this, smoke would inevitably be produced. This was a dangerous thing that could easily expose their location. As a result, even though the guards were extremely careful, there was still smoke coming out of the forest. It was spotted by the Mongolian scouts who were searching nearby. However, due to the distance, he couldn't immediately go forward to investigate. After thinking for a moment, he turned his horse around and rushed towards a nearby Mongolian army. Just as this Mongolian scout was about to leave, there was another cavalry scout about 8 li away who also saw this scene and left. The hot water was finally boiled. The unconscious Chenbo was supported by Xia Qian as he placed his feet into the tub of hot water. With a cry, Chenbo woke up from the hot water and slowly fainted again. Fortunately, after soaking in the hot water, his body began to sweat. After 2 hours, his body temperature began to drop and Chenbo woke up again. With the fever temporarily gone, Chenbo's spirit seemed to be much better. With Xia Qian's support, he forced himself to sit up. He first looked at the tub that was still warm and frowned. "You guys started a fire?" "Yes, it was my order." The 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Kang He, took a step forward and took responsibility. Beside him, Commander Xia Qian also followed up and said, "I also agree." AI. Hearing that they had started a fire, Chen Bo sighed. At this moment he didn't know what to say. However, since the fire had already started, it was too late to say anything. He could only hope that no one would discover them. "All right, let's not talk about this matter. This place could be exposed at any moment. We need to leave this place immediately and look for another safe place. Commander, the 2nd Cavalry Division is nearby. Should we gather with them?" Knowing that the commander would make such an arrangement, Division Commander Kang He volunteered. "No." Chen Bo shook his head and said decisively. "We are in danger at any moment. Tang Sheng has rebelled. No one knows if there are any spies in the army. For the safety of the army, we cannot take the initiative to contact anyone." A person couldn't fall in the same place twice. Chen Bo's method was understandable. Although it was a little passive, it was better in terms of safety. After the other 3 divisions went into martial law, it could indeed ensure their safety to the greatest extent. However, this way the military would be in danger. "It's fine. With our guard division, we will protect the general's safety even if we have to risk our lives." As the commander, Xia Qian had a determined expression. Although the guard division had suffered heavy losses on the way out of Alair City, there were less than 200 people left from the original 2,000 people. However, even if there was only one person left, they had to arrange for the general to be sent out. "Good." Hearing Xia Qian's attitude, Chen Bo patted the back of his hand in satisfaction. Then his face was covered by a layer of worry. "Sigh, it's a pity that our radio is broken and we can't contact the outside world. The situation here can't be spread out in time. I think the 6th young master must be worried sick." Chen Bo temporarily regained consciousness. However, it didn't eliminate the possibility of him having a high fever at any moment. After all, the hot water treatment didn't solve the problem. Without a safe environment to rest, the fever could reappear at any moment. Using this time, the guard division made the decision to move. However, just as everyone was packing up and Chen Bo was being carried onto a military stretcher, a soldier hurriedly came to report that there was a large group of Mongolian cavalry outside the mountain. There were at least 1,000 of them. "They found us so quickly?" Whether it was Kang He or Xia Qian, their faces sank. Chapter 1379. Maybe this is fate. How about this, you guys go first and I'll cover you. Remember, no one can have the right to mobilize the army without an order. If I die, then wait for the 6th young master to send a new commander to give the order. In comparison, Chen Bo's expression was calmer, as if everything that happened was not out of his expectations. "No, if we're leaving, we'll leave together." Xia Qian and Kang He said almost at the same time. As the captain of the guards, protecting Chen Bo was his most important task. Once the commander was in trouble, he would naturally not be able to avoid punishment. It was understandable that he would say such words. However, Kang He was the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, so he did not need to do this. However, Kang He still made such a decision. When Chen Bo heard it, he could not help but sigh. He could understand Kang He. He was originally the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, but because he was worried about his illness, he took the initiative to leave the division. Now it was not impossible for him to return to the division, but after he returned, he would probably only be able to hide in the dark and would not be able to mobilize the army. After Tang Sheng's rebellion, without Chen Bo's orders, even the commander could not mobilize the army. He felt that this commander had no authority. Instead of going back to hide, he might as well kill the enemy here and leave his life or death to the heavens. In fact, Chen Bo used to trust Commander Kang He very much. Otherwise, he would not have arranged for him to guard the nest in the far eastern region when he sent troops to rescue Beginning City. However, since there was a problem with Tang Sheng, as the commander, he had given the order that the army should not move without orders, so he had to treat everyone equally. Sighing, Chen Bo knew that it was impossible to chase the two of them away. He could only speak while he was still conscious. Since that's the case, Let's move to a safe place now. Let's go. After Xia Qian agreed, he ordered the guards to speed up. At the same time, he sent out scouts to scout the enemy's situation. He wanted to find an opening where the enemy was weak to charge out. There were 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen surrounding this area. They were quite lucky and were patrolling this area. When they heard the report from the scouts, they rushed over with the intention of giving it a try. Unexpectedly, they really bumped into a big fish. Although he wasn't sure if the person who was surrounded was a general from the Far Eastern region, it was already a great achievement that he was able to fight back. The Mongolian general's eyes glowed with excitement as he said, "Don't be in a rush to attack. We need to surround them before we attack. In any case, we cannot let a single person escape." It had to be said that these Mongol cavalry were quite strong. After roaming the Siberian region for many years, they had unique experience in fighting cavalry in mountainous regions. In this aspect, even the 5-star army that had been through hundreds of battles would not be their match. This was also the main reason why Yang Qindong did not immediately head for Arching, but instead set up an ambush beside the Amuga River. It was because they were good at fighting in the mountains that the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen did not take the Far Eastern army seriously. In their eyes, the Far Eastern army was just a defeated opponent. Therefore, after the order was given, they did not rush to surround the Far Eastern army. This made Xia Qian and the others, who were in the middle of the encirclement, very anxious. They were already prepared to fight back with all their might when the enemy charged at them. They were also prepared to look for a weak point to break out of the encirclement. However, the enemy did not panic and continued to shrink the encirclement. In this way, it would be hard to say if there was a weak point. They are still not in a rush to charge. We have to make the first move. Xia Qian was not a stubborn person. Otherwise, he would not have become the captain of the guards. After thinking deeply, he made a decision. He wanted to counterattack first and see if he could disrupt the enemy's formation and find a way to break out of the encirclement. "Let me go. You have to stay behind and ensure the safety of the general. This is the most important thing." Kong He stood up again and made his decision to lead the troops. "No. This is my responsibility as the captain of the guards. How can I let Mr. Kong take the risk?" Xia Qian shook his head and said, "What do you mean by taking the risk? Do you think we will be safe if we stay here?" Kong He did not back down. Obviously, the two of them saw the danger in front of them. Instead of sitting here and waiting for death, they might as well charge out and fight the enemy to their heart's content. At least they could kill a few enemies. The two of them were still arguing. Neither of them had the intention to back down. On the outside, the Mongolian cavalrymen were getting closer and closer to them. The encirclement was also shrinking. It looked like the battle would start at any moment. However, they did not know that behind them, there was a group of cavalrymen quickly gathering and closing in on them. They were the vanguard that Yang Qindong sent out. They were the vanguard led by Dai Qua, the former commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division. Considering that Dai Qua was familiar with the situation here, Yang Qindong sent him out to see if he could find Chunbo's position. When the time was right, he would coordinate with him from the inside. Based on his understanding of the military commander, Dai Qua searched a few places but did not find anything. When he once again marked out a region and wanted to continue searching, a scout reported that he saw smoke floating out from the mountains. He immediately brought a group of cavalrymen and rushed over. Considering that the information had not been confirmed, and he was not sure if this was the location of the Far Eastern Army, Dai Qua did not increase his speed. He was very careful to avoid being discovered by the Mongolian scouts. It was only when the scout at the front reported that they found many Mongolian cavalrymen outside the mountain, and that they were moving forward, that Dai Qua disregarded everything and rushed over. Since the Mongolian cavalrymen were moving, there must be a target here. Wouldn't their target be the Far Eastern Army that he was looking for? Thinking that he was finally going to find the missing army, Dai Qua was a little excited. He could not help but increase the speed of his army. One side was moving at full speed, while the other side was slowly encircling. With one increasing and one decreasing, the distance between the two sides was quickly closing. A huge battle was brewing in the forest. Reporting, "A large number of unknown cavalrymen have appeared behind us." The Mongolian scouts were not incompetent. Daiquo's actions behind them finally attracted their attention. At this moment, the distance between the two sides was less than 10 li 20 li of open land, and 10 li of forest. This was the distance that the scouts usually patrolled. When the Mongolian general Ulu heard the news, he was not worried but happy. Didn't this prove that they had caught a big fish? Otherwise, why would so many enemy cavalrymen appear? Can you see how many people there are? Ulu's voice carried a trace of excitement and agitation as he asked. There are too many trees, so I can't be sure. However, there should be no less than 1,000 people. The scout first shook his head, and then thought carefully before explaining. Okay. Hearing that there were no less than 1,000 people, Ulu was even more delighted. If there were too many enemies, he might have to consider whether or not he had the strength to fight. However, if they were on the same level as him, he had nothing to worry about. With the same number of soldiers, his cavalrymen were better at fighting in the mountains. He was confident that he could deal a heavy blow to the enemy. Send down the order. Apart from leaving 200 men to keep an eye on the target in the mountains, everyone else get ready to charge. Ulu decided to take down this group of enemy cavalrymen. In order to obtain the merit, he did not have the intention to report it to his superiors. This caused him to lose the last chance to kill Chenbo. After the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen received the order, they continued to advance slowly on the surface, shrinking the encirclement. However, they were secretly prepared to turn around and fight at any moment. Daiquo, who was quickly approaching from behind, did not notice this. He did not care who was surrounded. Based on the principle that an enemy of an enemy was a friend, he had to save them. As for whether or not he could defeat them, he was still confident. He was once a member of the Far Eastern Army, so Daiquo naturally knew about the strength of some Mongolian cavalrymen. Because the enemy had lived here since young, they were used to fighting in the mountains. If it was a one-on-one, he did not have much confidence. However, the scouts had reported that the enemy only had 1,000 cavalrymen. In terms of numbers, he had twice the enemy's. Furthermore, he had led the army through the baptism of war. Many of the soldiers were not veterans, but they had been through life and death situations. With double the number advantage, he was confident that he could defeat the enemy. Both sides had their own plans, and the distance between them was getting closer and closer. 10 miles, 8 miles, 6 miles. When they were only 3 miles away, they could hear the sound of horse hooves in the forest. The 800 Mongolian cavalrymen who were already prepared started to counterattack. They suddenly turned their horses around. As they ran back, they took out their bows. Charge, kill them all. Daiquo took the lead and rushed to the front. When he vaguely saw the shadows of many enemies flashing from behind some trees, he didn't hold back and shouted loudly. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave will win. In the dense forest, the speed of the warhorse was not much of an advantage. Whoever was braver and more courageous would naturally have the advantage. There was no need for anyone to give any orders. When the distance between the two sides was less than an arrow's distance, many bows and arrows were shot from all directions towards the approaching 5-star army's cavalry. Ding ding dang dang. The sound of arrows clashing with cavalry swords could be heard. The 5-star army soldiers did not show any signs of fear, and continued to charge forward. Even though along the way, some of their soldiers were shot off their horses, and some even died from the arrows, this did not stop them from advancing. The 5-star army's rules were very strict. When the general gave the order, even if there was a mountain of blades and a sea of flames in front of them, as long as there was no order to stop, they were not allowed to take a step back. Chapter 1380. Under the strict military rules, the 2,000 cavalry did not retreat at all. They could only continue to advance, closing the distance between the two sides. At the same time, the archers started to reflect the arrows. In terms of archery, the 5-star army had put in a lot of effort into training. Even though most of the Mongolian cavaliers had used the geographical advantage to hide behind some trees, The retaliation from the five-star army's archers still brought quite a lot of pressure to them. Even though their damage was not as great as when they were on the plains, they still managed to suppress the enemy's archers. After the five-star army paid the price of 200 cavalry casualties, they managed to close the distance between the two sides, and their advantage in numbers showed. This also forced the Mongol army, which only had 800 cavalry, to retreat. Uru, who was leading 200 cavalry to wait for news of the army's victory, suddenly heard that the battle was not going well, and that the army was being forced to retreat. A look of panic flashed across his eyes. It was not as if he had never seen the strength of the Far East Army before. Tang Sheng, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, was not the only one who had surrendered. He had led an entire division of more than 8,000 men. As one of the Mongol generals, Uru had seen the training of the Far Eastern Army. It was really normal, and compared to them, they were more than 10% weaker. Logically speaking, such an army should not be hard to defeat. As long as the arrows successfully suppressed the enemy until they couldn't even raise their heads, then they could find a suitable moment to suddenly attack. With the momentum of a tiger leaping down the mountain, it was possible to destroy the enemy's formation. At the same time, the enemy's fighting spirit and morale would also be destroyed. Once the morale of the army was messed up, no general would be able to turn the tables. As such, before this battle, Uru was really confident. However, who would have thought that the enemy would be so strong? In just a short time, they had actually charged over and forced his army to retreat? Uru's face was filled with confusion, wondering how the strength of the Far Eastern Army had suddenly increased by so much. Suddenly, another wave of battle cries entered his ears. When he looked over in panic, he saw hundreds of Far Eastern Army suddenly attacking. Without enough preparation, his remaining 200 cavalry were actually suppressed. The ones attacking were the 200 guards who stayed by Chen Bo's side. They had also heard the battle cries from the mountains. Based on their intuition, they knew that the reinforcements had arrived. Logically speaking, without Chen Bo's tiger tally, the various divisions could not act rashly. However, since the reinforcements had arrived, they naturally had to do something. After some discussion, Kong He and Xia Qian each led 100 warriors and rushed down the mountain from 2 different directions. They used practical actions to support the reinforcements, to create a center. Facing enemies from 2 sides, even though Uru was filled with reluctance, he still decisively gave the order to retreat. He had already thought it through. Since he did not have the appetite to swallow up the Far Eastern Army, he would ask for reinforcements. After all, he was the one who discovered these enemies, so he would definitely get the credit. What he needed to do next was to keep an eye on these targets. The Mongolian cavalry suddenly retreated. However, whether it was Dai Qua, Kong He, or Xia Qian, none of them had any intention of chasing. They tried to get closer, wanting to see the other party's identity. Archung. Before Uru's battle report reached here, Aaheki appeared first. With the token from General Nanlidi, Aaheki successfully met General Akmu. Following which, he followed Yang Chendong's instructions and told him about the 5-star army that had come to help the Far Eastern Army. Hearing that the Far Eastern Army's reinforcements had appeared, Akmu did not dare to delay, and quickly brought Aaheki to meet Khagan Hulihan. Within the Khagan's tent, Hulihan called Belinsky and Tang Sheng over to listen to the report. Along the way, Aaheki had already memorized Yang Chendong's instructions countless times. After seeing Hulihan, apart from the initial panic, he was able to think clearly and tell him everything. Based on Aaheki's description, the 5-star army only had 10,000 reinforcements, but the amount of supplies they brought was endless. There was no end to the carriages. While saying this, Aaheki noticed that both Hulihan and Akmu's eyes were filled with desire. Obviously, they were stimulated by the spoils of war. On the other hand, Belinsky seemed to be in deep thought, but it was hard to tell what he was thinking about. There really are countless carriages? Hulihan did not think too deeply about it. He just wanted to confirm whether Aaheki's words were true or not. Yes, I dare to use my head as a guarantee. Aaheki said confidently. Haha, good. Hulihan laughed loudly, then his gaze fell on Tang Sheng and asked, General Tang, You know the most about the 5-star army. Tell me about it. Yes. Tang Sheng cupped his fists and replied. About the 5-star army, this subordinate has come into contact with them once. He had seen them on the grassland when he and Commander Chen Bo were rescuing the beginning city. To be honest, they are very powerful and have a lot of troops. If we were to fight them on the grasslands, I'm afraid we wouldn't be their match. Oh, they're that powerful? Houlihan felt uncomfortable all over when he heard this. After all, the strength of the enemy always made him feel uneasy. Yes, they are very powerful. When the 5-star army launched their attack, the hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen of the Wale tribe and the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Great Ming Dynasty were no match for them. Tang Sheng recalled the scene that had happened in front of him and sighed. He even thought about whether his betrayal of the 5-star army was a good thing or a bad thing. However, it was already done, and it was meaningless to dwell on it now. He threw the pressure brought by the 5-star army to the back of his mind and continued. But that's only in an open area, like in a mountain forest. I think they can't even use 30% of their usual strength. In addition, the Far East is vast, with many mountains and lakes, and the roads are difficult to travel. It's not convenient for the army to move, and the transportation of food is also extremely difficult. In comparison, there's nothing to be afraid of. Houlihan was initially shocked by the might of the 5-star army, but when he heard Tang Sheng's words, he couldn't help but nod his head and say, "That's right, this is the Far East, not the grasslands. No matter how strong the 5-star army is, they won't be able to send their army here. Otherwise, just the rations alone will cause them to fall into chaos. In the end, this is our territory. Since they want to extend their tentacles here, we might as well cut them off and let them know who has the final say here." Houlihan, who already had a plan, changed his tone after saying this. He looked at Akmu and said, "Great General, this Khan will give you 10,000 elite troops. Do you have the confidence to defeat the 5-star army and bring back all the supplies they brought?" As the great general of the Mongolian army, Akmu was definitely a fierce general. It could be said that he wasn't afraid of anything. When Tang Sheng said that the 5-star army was so powerful, he snorted disdainfully. He wanted to prove that he was the strongest when he had the chance. Now that he had been chosen, there was no reason for him to disagree. He immediately said loudly, "Don't worry, Great Khan, 10,000 elite troops will be enough to take care of this 5-star army reinforcements." Haha, as expected of a great general. Good, if that's the case, then this Khan will wait to hear your good news. Houlihan laughed loudly. Clearly he was in a good mood. Yes. A proud expression flashed across Akma's face as he turned and left. Belinsky and Tang Sheng then left as well. After walking out of Houlihan's residence, Belinsky suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked at Tang Sheng, asking, "General Tang, the 5-star army only has about 10,000 cavalrymen. Why do we need to bring so many supplies when we're out?" "Oh." Tang Sheng chuckled and said, "The 5-star army doesn't lack money at all. Although they have been fighting in the north and south for the past few years, I have never heard of a shortage of resources. Every time they go to war, they will bring enough supplies and supplies. This has already become a habit." "I see." After hearing this, Belinsky couldn't help but reveal a look of shock. Earlier he was wondering if this was a trap set by the 5-star army. Now it seemed that he was thinking too much. However, when he thought about how rich the 5-star army's resources were, he couldn't help but yearn for it. Unfortunately, he had already joined forces with Houlihan and offended the 5-star army. It would be difficult for him to cooperate with them in the future. Not long after Belinsky and Tang Sheng left the residence, another scout came to see them. They were sent by General Ulu to ask for reinforcements. When Houlihan heard that he had found traces of the Far Eastern army, he was naturally overjoyed. However, he didn't immediately send troops to eliminate them. In his opinion, the Far Eastern army was already a dish in his bowl that could be picked up at any time. Instead, the 5-star army was the target that needed to be dealt with immediately. He was afraid that if he was late, the 5-star army would run away. "Go back and tell General Ulu that this Khan will send 1,000 cavalry to help. Have them keep an eye on the Far Eastern army. When General Akmu returns in triumph, It will be time to send troops to deal with the Far Eastern Army. Hulahan made the decision to deal with the 5-star army first before dealing with the Far Eastern Army. What he didn't expect was that this move would give the Far Eastern Army, which was already on the verge of death, time to breathe. This would sow the seeds of his defeat. General Dai Qua led the army to meet up with Division Commander Kong, he in the mountains. Then he went to see Commander Chen Bo, who had fainted once again. After the temperature dropped again, Commander Chen Bo slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes and saw Dai Qua, his originally dispirited aura also became excited. Division Commander Dai, why are you here? Did the reinforcements arrive? Chapter 1381. Yes, General. The 6th young master has arrived personally. He's bringing close to 100,000 soldiers and logistical personnel towards Al City. Dai Qua held Chen Bo's hand tightly as he spoke in an equally excited manner. What? The 6th young master has arrived personally? Haha, that's great. Cough, cough, cough. Chen Bo coughed violently because he was too excited. Sir, please take care of your body, Dai Qua said with concern when he saw Chen Bo's face turning red. It's fine, it's fine. The 6th young master is here. I'll get better soon. Ha ha ha. Chen Bo laughed again after he panted for a while. Although his fever had not completely subsided, it was obvious that he was in a better mood. Dai Qua was relieved when he saw that Chen Bo seemed to be in a good mood. Without this person, he would not be a commander. He was grateful to his savior, so he asked for instructions when he spoke. Sir, I brought a radio this time. Do you have anything to say to the 6th young master? Radio? That's great. Report the Far Eastern Army's situation to the 6th young master immediately, and ask for further instructions. Chen Bo's expression became more excited. He looked like he wanted to receive Yang Chendong's reply right away. The radio was taken out, and the report was sent out immediately after it was connected. Chen Bo narrated in detail about the fall of Arching and Chen Bo's suspicions about some of the officers in the army. Before his suspicions were resolved, he did not dare to gamble with the army. Therefore, he did not move the army without permission, and reported the situation one by one. When the radio was sent out, Yang Chendong, who was far away at the Amuga River, had already dug a pocket. He was just waiting for the Mongolian cavalry to enter. At that moment, Commander Dai Qua's telegram was sent to him. Yang Chendong calmly read the contents of the telegram. He wasn't angry, nor was he angry. As a lone army, the Far Eastern Army had been subjected to all kinds of tests ever since it was established. Due to geographical reasons, they couldn't get the support of the 5-star Army headquarters. This caused problems to arise during the construction process. The process of taking a new path had always been tortuous. Yang Chendong had long anticipated that there would be various problems. It was just that he had suffered a huge loss this time. Even the city was lost, which was far beyond his expectations. Fortunately, according to the telegram, the other supplies from the first city and Qiqian city were stored in another safe place and were not lost. This could be considered a blessing in disguise. As for what Chen Bo said about the problems in the army, Yang Chendong could understand. After all, other than the initial part of the Far Eastern Army's soldiers, the rest were recruited from the local area. Such an army would not have any problems if nothing happened. However, once they encountered adversity, it was hard to say. However, no matter what, Chen Bo's method of dealing with it was still good. He completely hid the army and controlled them. He did not allow any of them to go out. This could ensure that the army would not fall into chaos. Of course, this was not a good plan. At least, it was not a long-term plan. Fortunately, Yang Chendong was here. All of this would not be a problem anymore. Come, send a telegram to Chen Bo. Tell him that he can release the army. Tell him not to worry about the problems in the army. If there are problems, solve them. If the pustules don't show up, there are always hidden dangers. Now it's time to dig out these tumors. With his hands behind his back, Yang Chendong's aura surged, giving people a feeling of omnipotence. This time, since he came to the Far Eastern region, he naturally had to solve the problem. It would be fine if those disloyal people were honest. However, if they dared to do anything extreme, He did not mind using some heads as a sacrifice. Facing the foreign races, Yang Chendong would never be polite when he raised his butcher's knife. The telegram was quickly sent back. Yang Chendong also returned his thoughts to the present. Just now, the scouts had reported that the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry reinforcements had already left Archeng and were heading towards the Amuga River. They didn't even bring any rations with them. It was obvious that they were here with the intention of plundering. They would appear in front of him in 3 days. Come to die. Yang Chendong walked out of the tent and looked in the direction of Archeng. He saw countless 5-star army soldiers digging horse traps. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Akmu personally led the 10,000 Mongolian cavalry and rushed day and night. In less than 3 days, they were 30 miles away from the Amuga River. The scouts had already been sent out and there would be news soon. While arranging for the army to rest, Akmu also waited for the news from the scouts. He had already prayed to Tungri more than once that the 5-star army would not escape. Perhaps the prayers were effective, as the scouts returned and reported that the 5-star army was just 20 miles away from them. That's right. When he heard that the enemy was not 30 miles away but 20 miles away, Akmu heaved a sigh of relief. This was enough to prove that the 5-star army had been rushing and not waiting at the same spot. If the 5-star army's position did not change a few days ago, he would have thought that the enemy already knew that he was coming and had prepared a trap for him. But now the enemy had left their original position. This was enough to prove that his suspicions were unnecessary. In the past few days, the 5-star army had only rushed a few dozen miles. Not only did this not make Akmu think too much, it even made him look down on them. Just from the speed of the other party's movement, they were not a strong army at all. Naturally, his confidence in this battle had risen a little. Pass down the order. The army should have a good rest. We will attack the camp tonight. Oh right, let the people guarding Aheki relax and prepare some good food for him. Akmu said with a relaxed expression. He had some suspicions about Aheki before, so he arranged for people to watch him. Now that he did not have so many suspicions, he did not need to watch him too closely. Who knows, he might be a meritorious official. As the general that the Khan of Siberia relied on the most, Akmu was very proud and also very careful. He did not even send people to contact General Ulu. He decided to send a message after the attack tonight. This way, he could guarantee that he would take all the credit and not leak any information before the attack. It had to be said that this kind of consideration was very careful. But this time, the opponent was Yang Chendong. He was a war god who had carried out countless dangerous missions in both his previous life and this life. If they had to be compared, then one was the bright moon in the sky and the other was the light of a firefly. There was no comparison at all. Even though Akmu used all his methods, none of his actions could escape from Yang Chendong's grasp. When he learned from his scouts that the Mongolian cavaliers had entered a resting state while he was 20 miles away, he predicted that they might come to ambush the camp at night. After calling Tian Hu, Beta Persei and the others, Yang Chendong gave the order to meet the enemy tonight. The two people who admired Yang Chendong very much did not hesitate to turn around and make the arrangements. According to the agreement, once the Mongolian army made a move, Ba Daojiang, who followed Ulu, should send a message. But now there was no news, so it was a bit hasty to prepare to meet the enemy. But the order was given by Yang Chendong, so no one doubted it. Time quickly passed from noon to afternoon. And then the sky slowly darkened. The scouts sent a message through the radio. The Mongolian cavalry had indeed begun to move. They had moved. After receiving this news, Beta Persei was not surprised at all. Since the young master said that they would come at night, then they would definitely come. Send a message to Ba Daojiang. Once the battle starts, tell them to surround Akmu from the back, and try to kill as many enemies as possible. Yang Chendong said confidently with his hands behind his back. This time, he was not greedy to the point that he would not let even one enemy escape. After all, it was 10,000 cavalry, and he only had a little more than 10,000 troops. It would not be a problem to heavily injure the enemy, but it would be too difficult to kill them all. In other words, after this battle, the 5-star army's strength would be known to the Siberian Mongolian cavalry. As long as the enemy did not have a pig's brain, they would definitely think of a way to leave this place. Taking advantage of this opportunity, they would kill as many enemies as they could. The 5-star army had already made their preparations. They had dug a big hole, and were only waiting for the enemy to walk into it. Akmu, who did not know this, was indeed walking step by step towards the abyss. After the sky darkened, Akmu, as the general, gave the order to attack. 10,000 Mongol cavalrymen got on their horses and charged over in a grand manner, causing the birds in the forest to fly into the air in a panic. They seemed to have sensed the powerful killing intent as well. It was only a distance of 20 miles, and the Mongolian vanguard who had already planned out the best route took less than an hour to reach the area 2 miles away from the 5-star army's camp. At this moment, the 5-star army's camp was in a state of panic. It gave people the feeling that they did not expect anyone to attack them at this moment. They were completely unprepared. Get into formation. When Akmu arrived with the main force of the Mongolian cavalry, he also saw this scene. Immediately, his face was filled with joy. The chaos in the enemy camp made him look like a cat playing with a mouse. In order for the cavalry to unleash their full potential, they had to display their ferocious offensive abilities during the charge. Only by doing so would they be able to severely injure their opponents at the first moment and gain the initiative on the battlefield. This also required them to spread out in a formation that was dense enough and not obstructed each other at the same time to ensure that their combat strength could be better displayed. Chapter 1382. Charge. Akmu, who saw that the formation had spread out, could not wait to give the order to charge. When the Mongol soldiers heard the horn, they shouted and rode their horses over. As the distance got closer and closer, they readied their bows and waited, aiming at the 5-star army soldiers wearing military green uniforms one after another. Xiao xiao xiao. Xiao xiao xiao. When the distance between the two sides reached the range of the arrows seemed to have grown eyes and shot towards the soldiers of the 5-star army who were running back and forth in the camp without the need for any orders. In a short time, more than 100 5-star army soldiers were killed or injured by the arrows. Such a glorious result greatly boosted the morale of the Mongol cavalry. This was especially true for the cavalrymen at the very front. They had already disregarded the formation and charged forward, as if they would not be able to kill the enemy and gain merit if they were a step too late. The hope of victory had already made them lose their sight. These Mongolian cavaliers did not notice that the so-called 5-star soldier they had killed actually looked very similar to them. In reality, these people were the Mongol captives that Yang Chendong had captured. Before the war, Yang Chendong had promised these people that if they were lucky enough to survive this war, they would be exempted from the death penalty. After that, they would only need to work in arching for 3 years before regaining their freedom. With the temptation of death in front of them, these surrendered soldiers had no choice but to fight. Almost 2,000 captives wanted to fight. However, the flames of war were merciless and swords and spears had no eyes. Soon more than 200 people were killed or injured, and this number was constantly increasing, causing waves of cries for help. Akmu did not know about this. When he saw so many 5-star army soldiers die in front of him, he was completely blinded by victory. At that moment, he seemed to see countless treasures piled up in front of him for him to take. Not only Akmu, more and more Mongol cavalry were deeply stimulated by this temporary victory. They shouted and swung their swords. Sometimes there would even be laughter after they hit their targets. It's about time. Under a big tree at the periphery of the battlefield, Yang Chendong saw that the enemy's front and middle troops had entered the pocket. His eyes finally showed a hint of killing intent. He looked at Beta Persei beside him and said, "Blow the horn of charge." Beep 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 beep. The loud horn suddenly sounded in the silent night. It was like a clap of thunder in the ears of the Mongol cavalry. After the bugle call sounded, the wooden planks around the camp of the 5-star army were suddenly removed, revealing wide and long horse traps. The sharp treetops in the pits were like ogres with their bloody mouths wide open, waiting for their prey to enter. The sudden sound of the horn and the pits around them scared the Mongol cavalry, who had already charged into the 5-star army's camp. Their first thought they had fallen into a trap. They looked around like birds startled by the twang of a bow, and their eyes filled with fear. What's going on? As the commander of the army, Akmu was also trapped in the camp. After the sudden change in the situation, his face turned completely gloomy. His years of experience on the battlefield told him that things were bad. But in front of so many soldiers, he didn't want to admit this. So after shouting, he looked at a wooden box placed in the tent and shouted, "Men, pry open this box for this general." Yes. 2 soldiers stepped forward after receiving the order. Then, a hole was opened in the wooden box under the great force. Then a cry of surprise sounded. "This is an empty box." "What? Empty?" Akmu's face changed drastically. Then he pointed at the other wooden boxes and some jars and shouted, "Open, open all of them." In an instant, a group of soldiers rushed forward. But the result was not good. The wooden boxes were all empty. There was something in the jars, but it was not wine. It was kerosene. "Not good, it's kerosene. Be careful of a fire attack," Akmu cried out. As if to coordinate with him, countless torches suddenly appeared around the camp, illuminating the area as brightly as day. Countless cavalrymen were holding fire arrows, ready to fire. "Surrender and you can live. Those who resist will die." The voice of persuasion sounded out again. Beta Persei's loud voice was used again. "Surrender? You must be dreaming." Looking around, he realized that all the soldiers behind him had already fled. Not only that, but the 5-star army around the tent had also fled at some point. Seeing that there was nothing to gain, Akmu shouted angrily, "We have more people. Don't be afraid of them. Listen to my orders and charge out." He knew that he had sinned heavily. Once he was captured by the 5-star army, he would not have a good ending. Thus Akmu decided to take a risk. After the commanding general gave the order, the soldiers were also encouraged. They shouted loudly and were about to charge out on their horses. However, before they could charge forward, Young Heir had already given the order to shoot. Following that, tens of thousands of arrows were released in unison, bringing with them countless sparks as they rained down on the camp. The curtains of the tents were flammable to begin with, and with the help of the kerosene, very soon, a huge net of fire rose from the places where the fire arrows landed, and it wrapped around the Mongolian cavaliers one after another. When a person was faced with fire, perhaps a person with mental fortitude could remain calm, but war horses could not. When their pupils were filled with flames, they went berserk. No matter how their master ordered them, they no longer obeyed. Instead, they each rushed towards the safe zone they thought was the safest place. The war horses that charged out, no matter which direction they went, were all waiting for them in the wide horse traps. The sound of wooden stakes entering flesh could be heard, and the war horses that were still alive just a moment ago turned into dead horses one after another. The Mongolian cavaliers riding on their backs did not fare much better either. Most of the time, they were buried with the war horses before they died. The fire was everywhere, and they could not stay there. There were also huge horse traps waiting for them outside. The Mongol cavalry were stuck in a dilemma. As the commander, Akim could not do anything. He could only watch as one soldier after another charged out and died in the pits. If they were surrounded by the fire, they would be burned to death. There were 8,000 Mongolian elite cavaliers, and other than the soldiers who were not part of the 5-star army, most of them died in this predicament where they could neither advance nor retreat. The fire burned for nearly an hour, causing the surroundings to be filled with the smell of roasted meat, which made people want to vomit. However, there were some who were lucky and did not die in the fire. After a full hour of torment, the fire around them gradually became smaller, and the surrounding horse traps were also filled with human and horse corpses. They finally saw the hope of charging out. "Charge with me." Akmu, who saw the hope of survival, had a black face. Although his personal guards had tried their best to protect him from being burned to death, the smell of smoke and fire did not feel good. Now that he finally had a chance to show off his skills, he hollered out, and was about to launch a counterattack. At this moment, Akmu had close to 1,000 soldiers who could still fight. There were also 2,000 to 3,000 injured soldiers. Although they couldn't win with these, it was still possible to carve out a path of blood. In the hearts of many Mongolian cavalry, they were invincible on their horses. They were like their ancestors, invincible on their horses. It was good to have confidence, but too much confidence was asking for death. Especially when they were facing the elites of the 5-star army, who specialized in beating up the Mongolian cavalry. From the moment they charged, their fates were already decided. "Soldiers, charge with me." Tian Hu, who had been waiting by the side, pulled out his 2 cavalry swords. He had wanted to experience the skills of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. If it was not for Yang Qindong's plan, he would have charged out long ago. Luckily, there were still a few thousand enemies left on the battlefield, which was enough for the No. 1 Cavalry Army to practice their swords. A truly strong army did not depend on how hard they trained. Instead, they needed to have enough battle experience. Soldiers who had not been on the battlefield were all fake, and could only be considered armchair strategists. Luckily, the world was huge, and there were many whetstones for the 5-star army. After Tian Hu gave the order, the cavalry surged out behind him. It was as if everyone knew that there was more soup than meat, and they were afraid that if they were late, they would not be able to obtain any merits. The wolves moved, and after the soldiers of the No. 1 Cavalry Army charged, a killing intent filled the sky as they charged at the charging Mongolian cavalry. That killing intent seemed to have turned into a physical aura that charged into the enemy camp. For some reason, including Akmu, many of the Mongolian cavalry could not help but feel a chill run down their spines. This was the manifestation of the killing intent turning into a physical form. It was like a butcher. After killing so many pigs, even if they were alive, they could not help but shiver. The charge of the Mongolian cavalry did not stop because of this. They were like how they dealt with the small Russian tribes, spreading out and trying to use the wolf pack tactic to split up and win. Although they felt a chill in their bones when they charged, since they chose to charge, they would not stop for no reason. Arrow formation. Tian Hu, who was charging at the front, had no intention of stopping either. This was not the first time they had faced a pack of wolves, so they used the short arrow formation to charge forward as if they were familiar with it. Countless facts had proven that the Mongolian cavalry were not scary. They just needed to maintain their hearts and charge according to what they had learned in their training. Chapter 1383. This was one of the important instructions Yang Qindong gave to the army. When they faced a strong enemy, they were not to be easily moved by them. They would fight their own battles, and they would fight their own battles. They were not to change because of the enemy. If that happened, they would be giving up on their advantage and letting the enemy take advantage of them. In truth, this was often the treasure that decided the outcome of a battle between powerful players. When a weak player ran into a strong player, their rhythm would usually be messed up. In fact, to protect their lives, they would have no choice but to adapt to the enemy's fighting style. In the end, they would only have the strength to fight back and would not be able to attack at all. How could they not lose? On the other hand, if they fought in the style they were most familiar with, even though there was a high chance that they would lose, they could at least threaten the enemy. If they were lucky, it was not impossible for them to heavily injure the enemy and turn defeat into victory. As the strongest army among cold weapons, and the world's best cavalier army that had just been expanded into an army, Commander Tian Hu would often use Yang Qindong's words to teach his soldiers. Along with the fact that they were stronger than the enemy to begin with and the morale they gained after winning. The moment both sides clashed, Akmu was shocked to find that he was about to lose. In terms of strength, the 5-star army waited patiently, and the Mongolian cavaliers who were attacking could not compare to them. In terms of weapons, the soldiers of the world's best cavalier army were all equipped with divine sabers, and their advantage was clear. As long as the enemy dared to fight against them head-on, they would be cut in half after 3 slashes, and they would not be able to continue fighting. In terms of morale, the Mongolian cavaliers had just suffered a great defeat, and all the soldiers were like birds that were startled by the twang of a bow. On the other hand, the 5-star army had just obtained a great victory, and everyone's confidence was high. This made them even more decisive when they attacked, and the gap between them and the enemy increased by a large margin. When comparing them, the difference in strength was obvious. It could be said that before the battle even started, the victor had already been decided. A tiger had entered a pack of wolves, and it was not just one tiger, but a tiger that had more people than a pack of wolves. The pressure it brought to the Mongolian cavaliers could be easily seen. After fighting for around 15 minutes, Akmu was shocked to find that he could not even use half of the strength he had before. The number of casualties continued to increase, especially as the number of times they clashed increased. Many of the sabers in the Mongolian cavaliers' hands were cut in half, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of weapons. The speed at which they lost became even faster. Protect the general and open up a bloody path. Around a dozen of his remaining personal guards protected Akim. When they saw that the Mongolian cavaliers were about to leave, these personal guards shouted in unison, and gathered together to charge out of the corner surrounded by the 5-star army. "Let me do it." A warhorse suddenly rushed out from Yang Chendong's side. Needless to say, that tall figure and that deafening voice belonged to none other than Beta Persei. Speaking of which, Beta Persei also had the courage of 1,000 men. He had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years and could receive pointers at any time. When it came to individual combat power, even in the 5-star army, there were few who could match him. Usually he had to protect the safety of the 6th young master, so he did not have many chances to go to the battlefield. Now that the situation was set, he was itching to fight. When he saw that there were a dozen enemy cavaliers who wanted to escape, he did not hold back and immediately rode his horse away. The dozen Mongolian cavaliers were unusually fierce as they protected Akim and destroyed the path that the 5-star army had blocked. They formed a large force and charged out of the battlefield. To be able to become Akim's personal guards, their skills were naturally not bad. Although they did not create the 18 shadow guards or the 12 protectors, they were all strong men who could fight against 10 or even dozens of people. If they gathered their strength together, normal 5-star army soldiers would not be able to block them. This could be seen from the fact that they had only lost 4 people, even though they had injured more than a dozen 5-star army cavaliers along the way. And just when they had already charged through a few blockade lines and were about to break out of the encirclement and escape, a war horse and a tall figure blocked their path. Without any warning, the person rushed in front of them and raised his saber to slash down. Waves of great force crashed into the sabers of the Mongolian personal guards, and a great pressure came from their arms. Cling cling clang clang, clang 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 clang. It was as if he had entered a realm where no one could stop him. Block, block, chop, lift, sweep, press. All sorts of attacks were displayed by Yang Er on horseback. His movements were quick and steady, and he suppressed the Mongolian cavaliers who seemed to be unstoppable a moment ago to the point that they were forced to retreat. Fall. The saber slashed down fiercely and hit the chest of a Mongolian cavalier. The great force caused the cavalier's saber to break, and the blade was also wedged into the cavalier's sternum. The cavalier fell off his horse. "Get down from your horses." Once the saber was pulled out from the chest of a Mongolian cavalier, it was raised and flicked, and it hit another Mongolian cavalier who was charging at him. After the saber sliced through the cavalier's arm, another Mongolian cavalier cried out in pain and fell off his horse. Get down, all of you." The man and horse quickly weaved through the Mongolian cavaliers. His saber was like a nimble snake, and the Mongolian cavaliers around him were either cut down, flicked, or pressed down from their horses. No one was able to withstand a single blow from him. 6th young master, second brother's strength has increased again. When the captain of the first team, Chiu Vi, saw this scene, he could not help but sigh in amazement. At the same time, he was eager to give it a try. Even though he could not compare to Beta Persei's position in Yang Chendong's eyes, because he was close to him, he had received a lot of pointers. He really wanted to go up and see how strong he was. Beta Persei is a person who is willing to work hard. Let's see. These people might not be enough for him to kill alone. Yang Chendong's gaze was like a torch, and he spoke with the gaze of a grandmaster. As the saying went, once an expert made a move, the truth would be revealed. Even though Beta Persei's strength was much weaker than his, normal Mongolian cavaliers could no longer stop him. Since Yang Chendong had said this, Chiovi could only suppress the thought of going up to help Beta Persei. Then he stared at the battlefield with his eyes wide open. He wanted to learn how Beta Persei fought. Many times, watching a battle between experts was also an experience of enlightenment, and it was also a rare opportunity. In the battlefield, Beta Persei killed more than 10 Mongolian cavaliers in a short period of time, and finally faced off against General Akhmu. As the great general of Siberia, Khan Hurihin, Akhmu did not rely on flattery to get to his position. He was a person with real instincts. Before he met the 5-star army. No. It should be said that before he fell into the trap tonight, Akhmu was very arrogant. In his eyes, the Han people were as weak as sheep. They were not even as weak as the Russians who dared to resist them from time to time. Since the 5-star army was mainly made up of Han people, there was no such thing as being strong or powerful. As long as he arrived with the army, one charge would be enough to scare the opponent. Then it would be the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, and the pursuit of the enemy would be a great victory. It was precisely because he thought that everything was too simple and too easy. When he found out that he was surrounded, Akhmu was shocked. He finally knew that the Han people he faced this time were different from the Han people in the past. They had some ability. However, this ability was nothing more than relying on schemes and trickery to win. If it was face-to-face, blade-to-blade, he was confident that he would be able to beat the crap out of these Han people. As a result, there was the scene of him leading the army to counterattack. Then the confidence in his heart was thrown away one by one. What did they mean that he accidentally fell into a trap? What did they mean that the Han people were weak and easy to bully? Right now, Akhmu only wanted to kill all those who had spread the news. If the Han people were easy to bully, then who was the one who beat him up? After failing time and time again, breaking through the bottom line of his heart, Akhmu no longer had the heart to fight against the 5-star army. This was because he found that even if there were no schemes or traps, he would not be able to gain any advantage against the 5-star army. The only difference was that the other party would have to pay a higher price. However, the result of the battle could not be changed. He would definitely lose and the Han people would win. If he could escape this time, Akhmu would definitely tell Great Khan Hurihin to retreat as far away as possible from the 5-star army. The Han people were simply devils, executioners who killed without batting an eyelid. On the contrary, they were like clowns who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. They were so ignorant, so arrogant, and so reckless. However, it was clearly too late for him to think of all this at this time. At this time, Akhmu was already a little scared. If it was possible, if he was not a great general, perhaps he would choose to surrender in order to survive. However, at this time he had no other choice. With the trust and support that Hurihin had given him over the years, even if he had to fight to the death, he would not say a word about surrendering. Young Heir's chest heaved up and down as he went on a killing spree. After all, he had killed and injured more than a dozen people, so his physical strength was somewhat depleted. Even so, when facing Akhmu, he was still full of pride and said, "Seeing that you are still a general, I will give you a chance. If you don't want to die, surrender." Different from the cloth armor that the other Mongolian cavalry wore, Akhmu wore metal armor. Moreover, it was not the half-metal armor that normal soldiers wore. Instead, it was a full metal armor that protected his body. Just based on this, his identity should not be simple. Beta Persei wanted to capture this person alive. It would be a great achievement. Looking at Beta Persei, Akhmu quickly shook his head. "You are very strong, but this general will never surrender. My soul has long returned to Tungri. Even if you kill me now, it will not be long before I will be a hero again." "Tungri my ass," Beta Persei muttered. He had long known from Yang Chendong that the so-called Tungri was like the god that the Han people talked about. It was a kind of belief and a kind of spiritual support. It did not exist at all. Of course, he also knew that many Mongolians respected Tungri. If anyone said anything bad about them, they would immediately become the public enemy. He would not do such a stupid thing. Chapter 1384. Beta Persei's eyes became brighter as he cursed Akma's ignorance in his heart. Since he won't surrender, then I'll just kill him. I hope he's not too weak, so I can fight to my heart's content. Slowly raising his sword and arm, Beta Persei assumed a posture of a life-and-death battle. Similarly, Akmu also raised his saber and raised it high up in the air. When their eyes met, the word kill came out of their mouths almost at the same time. Then the warhorses under both sides let out a neigh, and the two men quickly approached each other. One was the great general of the Siberian Mongol cavalry. He held a high position, was unusually brave, and had experienced hundreds of battles. The other was the leader of the 5-star army. He was a close subordinate of Yang Xie's leader, Yang Qindong. He had extraordinary strength and the power of his sword was mighty. The so-called strongest of the strongest referred to them. In the process of rushing, when the warhorses crossed, the two sabers quickly collided and separated in an instant. In the first round, they were evenly matched, and it looked like they were evenly matched. After galloping for a distance, the two men turned their horses around and stared at each other. After the exchange, the two men didn't seem any different from before. But if one looked carefully, they could still see the differences. For example, Beta Persei's indifferent face, the tension in Akma's eyes, and his slightly trembling right arm. With the advantage of the weapon, Yang Er, who was holding the heavenly saber, could release all of his strength to the maximum when fighting. He didn't have to worry about the weapon breaking down. In contrast, Akmu couldn't do the same. After seeing the scene of many soldiers' weapons being broken, he was afraid of the 5-star army's sabers. This made him not dare to use all his strength in the fight, because he wasn't sure if the saber in his hand was strong enough to break in two. The fear in his heart and the inability to use all his strength weakened his momentum and confidence by at least 30%. In a battle between experts, a small mistake could be fatal. Who would dare to not use their full strength? It could be said that with the advantage of the toughness of the weapon, Beta Persei had already gained the upper hand before the battle even began. The tremendous force behind the blow had already caused Akma's arm to feel sore and numb, showing signs of defeat. "Ha ha ha, you and I had a fair fight. How delightful." Again. Beta Persei laughed heartily as he felt the exhilaration of releasing his power. After a loud shout, he urged his horse forward. "Fair my ass." Akmu cursed in his heart. Due to the disadvantage of his weapon, he didn't dare to use his full strength. Naturally, he couldn't display his full strength. Now that he saw Beta Persei rushing over again, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and charge forward. Ding ding dang dang dang. After another clash, Beta Persei laughed again and launched another charge, forcing Akmu to passively attack again and again. In just a short while, the two sides had clashed for at least 10 rounds. Finally, the saber in Akma's hand broke into two. Although the quality of the weapon in his hand was extraordinary as a supreme general, there was still a huge gap between his weapon and Yang Xie's more mature forging skills. It was already very difficult for him to hold on until now. Not only that, because he didn't dare to use his full strength, Akmu had been enduring the tremendous force from Beta Persei on his wrist. At this time, his right arm had become red and swollen, and it was difficult for him to even lift the saber. "Hey, why did your saber break by itself? Are you afraid of your grandfather? Well, if that's the case, why don't you surrender? You seem to have some ability. If you surrender, your grandfather will spare your life. How about it?" Beta Persei seemed to have just noticed the other party's broken saber, and said jokingly. Akma's face was flushed red. He was furious and infuriated. After so many years of fighting, this was the first time he heard that a saber could be afraid of people. Knowing that Beta Persei was humiliating him, Akmu glared at him and said, "If you want to fight, then fight. You're a vile person with a sharp tongue. You're courting death." Seeing that Akmu still had no intention of surrendering, Beta Persei was also enraged. After a roar, he urged his horse to charge again. This time, he wouldn't hold back and vowed to cut down his opponent. Beta Persei wasn't worried about whether or not he could kill Akmu. Since the young master didn't say anything to stop him, it wouldn't be a problem to kill this person. Since that was the case, he didn't have any worries and just focused on fighting with all his might. Akmu held half of the saber in his hand, and his expression was ugly. But he didn't have the slightest intention of surrendering. A general had died in 100 battles. Since he had won the war, he had to be prepared to die. He only hated himself for being careless this time. Not only did he not have long to live, but he also implicated nearly 10,000 soldiers to die here. In the end, he still failed to live up to the Khan's trust. Akmu, who already had the intention to die, didn't have any more worries. The worst outcome was nothing more than death. How could a person who wasn't even afraid of death be afraid of Beta Persei's saber? Akmu, who was holding half of the saber in his hand, charged forward without any intention of dodging. He launched the last attack of his life. Beta Persei finally felt that something was wrong. As the distance between the two sides got closer and closer, the other party didn't have the slightest intention of dodging. There was only an indomitable momentum and an attitude of mutual destruction. Beta Persei, who didn't want to die with Akmu, had no choice but to change the direction of his saber midway. The saber also changed from a slash to a sweep and fiercely slapped Akmu's body. The powerful saber slapped Akmu's chest, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. Even a tree branch could exert a great amount of power, let alone a saber. Blood gushed out of Akmu's mouth as he was struck. Akmu forcefully gathered his strength and swept his saber across Yang Secon's black armor, leaving a mark on it. But it was only a shallow mark. The attack range of the broken saber was limited, which allowed Beta Persei to escape. After noticing the saber mark on the armor, Beta Persei first took a deep breath. He didn't dare to imagine what the result would be if the other party didn't use a broken saber, but a whole saber. In other words, he was almost injured by the other party. If he wanted to kill his own people, he had to kill them first. Beta Persei would not allow a defeated general to threaten him. After shouting angrily, he raised his saber and slashed back. This slash used almost 90% of his strength. Akmu, who had just swung his saber and used up all his strength, had a regretful expression on his face. He was so close to beheading the general of the 5-star army. Just as he was feeling regretful, he felt a cold wind coming from above his head. When he raised his head again, a sharp saber was falling towards his head. It was already dark. Although there were torches around, it was still difficult to see. Akmu only saw the shadow of a saber flash above his head, and then an indescribable pain attacked his whole body. After struggling for a while, Akmu's chest suddenly split open and blood gushed out. Then he lowered his head and saw that his body had been split in half. Akmu's nose twitched as he could no longer breathe in oxygen. His body trembled a few times before he fell off the horse and onto the ground, forever losing his consciousness and senses. Beta Persei, who had killed Akmu, let out a long sigh. Reality told him that if he underestimated any opponent, he would have to pay a heavy price. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party was holding a broken blade, the one who would be lying on the ground right now would be him. With Akmu killed, the other Mongol soldiers who were lucky enough to survive were either killed or surrendered. Before the sun rose, the battle had already ended. Of the 8,000 Mongol cavalry that charged into the ambush, not a single one managed to escape. The battle on the main battlefield had already ended. Outside the Amuga River, the battle was still ongoing. When the 2,000 Mongol cavalry saw that the main force of the army had fallen into the 5-star army's trap, they turned around and fled. The previous scene had already told them that tonight's ambush had failed. It was not difficult for the 8,000 Mongol cavalry to not be able to escape. Since they had already lost, it was impossible for them to turn the situation around with just 2,000 people. Rather than continuing to die, they might as well escape and report this matter to the Khan. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry retreated. However, before they could run 5 miles, Nanlidi brought a Huchi, who had come to report, and a group of cavalry to welcome them. While they were still far away, Nanlidi's voice rang out first. "Are the people in front our brothers? We are here to support you." Before the battle had even started, a Huchi had been released by Akmu so that he could find Nanlidi and ask him to send troops together. He had purposely notified them a little later, so that Akmu would not steal the credit from him. However, What he did not expect was that what awaited him was not credit but death. Of course, even if Akmu had notified Nanlidi in advance, he would have found all sorts of reasons to delay. The one in control of the army was not him, but Ba Daojiang and the 1st Division Commander Taimu. They led 4,000 troops and waited here for the chance to deal the final blow to the Mongol cavalry. When the flames in the camp soared into the sky, the 4,000 cavalry finally moved. They galloped all the way and killed any fish that fell into the net. The 2,000 Mongol cavalry that had escaped were unfortunately stopped by them. After losing contact with their commander, the 2,000 Mongol cavalry were defeated by a wave of 5-star army. The cavalry fled in all directions and rushed into the surrounding forest. With Tian Yi and Lin Duo, even 40,000 cavalrymen would not be able to surround the entire area, let alone 4,000 cavalrymen. Ba Daojiang and Taimu could only watch as the scattered Mongolian soldiers escaped. They focused their attention on the main force of the Mongolian cavalry. Compared to the main battlefield, the battle on this side of the battlefield had already ended a step earlier. The final tally was that they had captured and killed around 1,600 cavalry. This meant that at least 400 Mongol cavalry had escaped during the night. When they reported this to Yang Qindong, he was not surprised. He only said, "The army should use the time to clean up the battlefield and rest. Tomorrow afternoon, we will set off for Archung." Since they had already revealed their tracks and displayed their strength, in order to prevent Hurahin from escaping with the army, they had to speed up their march. Even so, Yang Qindong did not have the confidence to kill all the enemies. This was caused by the environment. The Far East region was filled with forests, lakes, and mountains. If someone wanted to hide in such an area, finding them would be as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.